The Ben Franklin effect is a counterintuitive psychological phenomenon where someone who does you a favor is more likely to develop a liking for you, not the other way around. This breaks the conventional logic that says we help people we like them. Instead, our minds often rewrite our attitudes to align with our actions, even if those actions were against our initial feelings. Ben Franklin effect because the story behind this effect dates back to Benjamin Franklin himself. Faced with a political rival who disliked him, Franklin didn't attempt to win him over with compliments or kindness. Instead, he asked the man to lend him a rare book. The rival, flattered or intrigued, complied. After Franklin thanked him, something unexpected happened. The rival began to treat him with warmth and respect, as if a genuine bond had been formed. The man had subconsciously restructured his beliefs. Why would he help Franklin if he hated him? His brain couldn't justify the dissonance, so it adjusted. I must like him, or else I wouldn't have done him a favor. This psychological loophole is unsettlingly powerful. It suggests that asking for help, something we often avoid out of pride, can actually endear us to others. It flips the script on manipulation. Instead of giving favors to earn affection, you ask for them. And once someone invests in you, they unconsciously begin to root for you. Their identity gets partially tied to your success, your survival, your approval. They begin to protect what they have helped build. Used with precision, the Ben Franklin effect can subtly erode hostility and turn indifference into alliance. Manipulators exploit it by planting small requests, lending a pen, explaining a task, offering advice, each one a silent hook. By the time their target realizes what's happening, their emotions are entangled in a false sense of loyalty. What makes this effect dangerous is its invisibility. The one being influenced feels noble for helping. Their ego is reinforced. They feel generous, open-hearted, even wise. But underneath, their brain is rewriting emotional scripts without their conscious permission. The enemy becomes a friend, not because of changed values, but because of a borrowed book. The mind doesn't always follow the truth. It follows the path of least resistance. Triangulation. Triangulation is a manipulative psychological strategy where a third party is brought into a two-person dynamic to create tension, confusion, or rivalry. At its core, triangulation is about control, using indirect communication, comparison, or gossip to destabilize relationships and assert dominance without ever appearing overtly aggressive. It's one of the most insidious tactics used by narcissists, toxic partners, or power-hungry leaders to keep others unbalanced and emotionally dependent. Imagine confiding in someone, believing you have a private bond, only to realize later they've shared parts of your conversation with another person, twisting your words just enough to cause doubt. Or worse, they've subtly praised someone else in your presence, just enough to make you feel insecure, inferior, or excluded. That's triangulation. It's not always loud or confrontational. It thrives in whispers, glances, carefully chosen words, and strategic silence. The power of triangulation lies in its emotional dissonance. When someone uses it against you, you start questioning yourself. Why do I suddenly feel replaced? Why am I jealous? Why do I need to prove my worth? These questions chip away at your self-esteem, making you more pliable and eager to regain your sense of value in the eyes of the manipulator. The more confused and emotionally reactive you become, the more control they gain. This tactic often appears in romantic relationships where one partner flirts with or references others just enough to trigger insecurity. It's seen in families where a parent pits siblings against each other to maintain authority, or in workplaces where a boss praises one employee in front of another to breed quiet competition. The result? Loyalty is fractured, unity dissolves, and the manipulator stands at the center, untouchable, needed, in control. What makes triangulation emotionally devastating is the illusion it creates. You believe the real problem is the third person, your rival, but the real weapon is the orchestrator. They provoke reactions, then step back, claiming innocence. You're left feeling paranoid, desperate for approval, unsure of what's real. The more you chase clarity, the deeper you fall into their web. That's the brilliance of triangulation. It makes you question others, then yourself, until the only stable point in the chaos seems to be the very person who caused it. Negative reinforcement loop. The negative reinforcement loop is a psychological trap where behaviors are shaped and controlled through the strategic removal of discomfort, not by offering rewards, but by making relief feel like a gift. It's a manipulation that operates in cycles, quietly tightening its grip every time you comply, just to escape the emotional or psychological strain inflicted upon you. What makes this technique so effective and dangerous is that it doesn't look like control at first. It feels like relief. Picture a situation where someone criticizes you, gives you the silent treatment, or makes you feel unwanted, anxious, or afraid. Then, suddenly, once you apologize, comply, or change your behavior, the discomfort disappears. They're warm again. They smile. They talk to you like nothing happened. Your brain, desperate to avoid that emotional punishment again, locks onto the pattern. Do what they want, and the pain stops. This loop doesn't reward you with genuine affection. It conditions you like an animal avoiding a shock. And over time, this avoidance becomes your prison. You walk on eggshells. You preempt their moods, you suppress your needs, your voice, and even your identity, just to avoid triggering that punishment again. But the rules are always shifting. That's the point. You're not supposed to win, just to keep chasing the feeling of okay. In toxic relationships, romantic, familial, or professional, this loop becomes the foundation of power. The manipulator never has to shout or physically threaten. All they need to do is make you feel bad when you resist and make that bad feeling go away when you obey. It's subtle, it's cyclical, and it erodes your sense of autonomy without you ever realizing how deep it's gone. The most terrifying part of a negative reinforcement loop is how it rewires your emotional instincts. You begin to associate peace not with real love or connection, but with compliance, with silence, with surrender. You start thanking the person who hurt you simply for not hurting you today. And so the loop continues, not because you want it, but because your nervous system can't take the pain of saying no. The escape becomes the trap. Intermittent reinforcement. Intermittent reinforcement is one of the most psychologically addictive manipulation tactics ever discovered. It works not by providing consistent rewards, but by delivering them unpredictably, creating a powerful emotional dependence in the victim. This technique isn't just manipulation, it's emotional gambling, and it turns people into addicts, not to substances, but to other people's approval, affection, or attention. Imagine someone treats you with warmth, validation, and love, then suddenly pulls away, becomes cold, dismissive, or even cruel. You're left confused, anxious, trying to figure out what you did wrong. Then, just when you're about to give up or confront them, they shower you with affection again. They smile, compliment you, act like nothing happened. Your heart floods with relief. That moment of pleasure becomes your fix. And so you stay, you wait, you hope, and the cycle repeats. The unpredictability is the hook. Unlike consistent reinforcement, which builds trust, intermittent reinforcement builds obsession. It mirrors the same psychological patterns found in slot machines and gambling addiction. You never know when the reward is coming, so your brain works overtime trying to earn it. Dopamine surges not when you receive the reward, but when you anticipate it. That anticipation becomes a drug. In relationships, this tactic turns toxic partners into gods. They control when you feel loved and when you feel worthless. They don't need to physically trap you. You trap yourself, desperately trying to win back the version of them that once made you feel alive. You remember the highs so vividly, they eclipse the abuse. You excuse the bad because you're starving for the good. What makes intermittent reinforcement especially cruel is that it's unpredictable by design. The manipulator gives you just enough to keep your hope alive, but never enough to feel secure. You're constantly chasing an emotional jackpot that may never come again, and even when you know it's damaging, the attachment feels unbreakable. You crave the very person who's breaking you. This isn't love, it's programming, and by the time you realize you're being conditioned, the hook is already buried in your psyche, deep enough to make you feel that the pain is worth it, as long as there's a chance of feeling that rush one more time. Covert contracts. Covert contracts are unspoken, invisible agreements that one person creates in their mind without ever telling the other person. They're built on the belief that if I do this for you, then you will do that for me, even though the expectation is never communicated aloud. It's a silent transaction rooted in manipulation, resentment, and suppressed needs disguised as kindness. Someone who uses a covert contract might bend over backward for you, help you move, listen to your problems, go out of their way to make you feel cared for. On the surface, it looks generous. It looks like love, but underneath, there's an invisible debt being tallied. They believe you owe them something: your time, loyalty, affection, sex, commitment, something they feel entitled to, simply because they played the good person. The trap of the covert contract is emotional blackmail wrapped in niceness. You're being set up to disappoint someone without knowing it. When you don't fulfill their secret expectation, they don't say, "I was hoping for this." Instead, they lash out, withdraw, act cold, or guilt trip you. And you're left confused. What did I do wrong? The answer is, you violated a contract you never agreed to in the first place. This tactic is common in relationships, especially when one partner is afraid of rejection or direct communication. Instead of stating their desires clearly, they hide them inside acts of service. They hope that if they prove themselves valuable, you'll naturally give them what they want in return. But when that doesn't happen, the resentment brews like poison. Suddenly, their kindness feels conditional. Their generosity turns sharp. The smile fades, and you're left feeling like a villain for not reading their mind. What makes covert contracts so emotionally explosive is the betrayal on both sides. The manipulator feels betrayed because you broke the deal. You feel betrayed because the love or care you received wasn't real. It was bait. It's a quiet form of control that punishes you for failing to honor an agreement you never signed. And the worst part? If you confront them, they'll deny everything. "I never said I expected anything." They'll paint themselves as the martyr, and you as the ungrateful one. That's how covert contracts turn caring into a weapon, and silence into a trap. Foot in the mouth technique. The foot in the mouth technique is a disturbingly subtle manipulation method that disarms people by first appealing to their empathy before making a request. It works by creating a moment of psychological vulnerability, a small crack in someone's emotional armor. Through a simple human question, "How are you feeling today?" It seems innocent, harmless, even kind, but behind it lies a calculated move to increase compliance. Here's how it works. The manipulator asks about your well-being. It could be casual, "Hope your day's going well," or more direct, "How are you holding up?" This softens your defenses. Most people instinctively respond politely, often saying they're fine or good, regardless of how they really feel. That tiny exchange creates a mental contradiction. If I'm doing okay, I should be helpful. I shouldn't say no. That's the trap. Right after this moment of vulnerability, the manipulator makes their request. It might be small, a favor, a concession, a bit of your time, but because you've just affirmed that you're doing well, and because they've shown concern, saying no feels emotionally wrong. You don't want to seem cold, uncooperative, ungrateful, so you agree, without realizing you've just been cornered by your own social conditioning. What makes this tactic so dangerous is that it plays on politeness and guilt. It turns your empathy into a weapon against you, and you don't even see it coming. You think you're being kind, reasonable, helpful, but in truth, you're being manipulated by someone who understands exactly how to bypass your defenses. Salespeople use it. Bosses use it. Even friends and family use it, often without realizing they're doing it. It works best in moments where you're distracted or emotionally off balance. The question feels personal, even caring, and that's what gives it power. It's not aggressive. It's not a demand. It's a soft pressure wrapped in false warmth. You feel like you have a choice, but everything about the setup makes not complying feel like you're violating an unspoken social rule. By the time you realize what just happened, you're already saying yes, smiling, agreeable, cooperative, and the request you would have refused in a different context is now your responsibility, all because someone asked how you were doing. Reverse psychology, inversion. Reverse psychology, also known as inversion, is a subtle but deeply manipulative technique that operates by exploiting human resistance. It works by suggesting the opposite of what you actually want someone to do, knowing that their instinct to rebel, prove autonomy, or assert control will drive them to do exactly what you intended all along. It's a mind game of suggestion and defiance, where the real power lies in pretending to give it up. At its core, reverse psychology triggers one of our most primal psychological needs, the need for freedom. When people feel like their choices are being restricted, their natural response is to push back. It's called reactance, an emotional response that makes us want to reclaim our autonomy the moment we sense it's under threat. The genius of reverse psychology is in weaponizing that instinct. Say you're dealing with someone stubborn or defiant. If you tell them you should really apply for that job, they might resist out of pride or fear. But if you say, you probably won't go for it, it's not really your thing, their ego flares up. Suddenly, they want to prove you wrong. The idea becomes theirs. They feel in control, when really, they're playing into the very outcome you planted like a seed. This tactic is often used on children, rebels, and authority-averse personalities, but it's just as powerful in adult relationships, negotiations, and sales. A manipulator might say, you probably won't want to be with someone like me, knowing that the listener will feel compelled to defend their interest. The moment you make something feel out of reach or disapproved of, it becomes desirable. It's not logic, it's emotional rebellion. The dark power of reverse psychology lies in its deniability. If confronted, the manipulator can say, I never told you to do it. That's the cruelty of inversion. It lets you lead people while pretending you aren't leading at all. It builds the illusion of independence while guiding their choices with invisible strings, and the victim never realizes the manipulation. They think it was their own idea. They feel smart for proving you wrong. Meanwhile, you're smiling, knowing you never wanted them to agree. You wanted them to resist. That resistance is the doorway. That resistance is the trap. Gaslighting by omission. Gaslighting by omission is a particularly cruel form of psychological manipulation, where the abuser doesn't lie outright. They simply leave out key details that distort your entire sense of reality. It's not what they say, it's what they don't say that breaks you. This tactic slowly makes you question your memory, your instincts, and eventually your sanity, not through confrontation, but through silence. It begins subtly. You notice gaps. Things don't quite add up, but there's no clear evidence of deceit. A partner leaves out part of where they were. A friend fails to mention something important. A boss forgets to tell you a detail that would have changed your entire decision. You start sensing something's off, but when you ask, you're met with calm deflection. I didn't think it mattered. You must have misunderstood. Or worse, I never said that. And because you weren't told the lie, you can't prove it. You start doubting your perceptions, your emotional responses. You replay conversations over and over in your head, trying to find what you missed. But the truth was never there. It was withheld. The silence was the weapon. Gaslighting by omission thrives in emotionally charged relationships. The manipulator carefully curates the narrative, feeding you only what keeps you compliant, confused, or dependent. They leave out context that would empower you. They omit truths that would reveal their patterns. They erase timelines, omit names, skip over motivations, all while maintaining a mask of innocence. It feels like you're losing your grip, when in reality, they're tightening theirs. This form of gaslighting is deeply damaging because it leaves no fingerprints. You're left explaining what wasn't said. You feel paranoid, but can't pinpoint why. And that confusion turns inward. You blame yourself. You become anxious, hypervigilant, desperate for clarity that never comes. That desperation is their control. Over time, you may stop asking questions. You may stop trusting your gut. You learn to live with half-truths and missing pieces, convincing yourself that if something were really wrong, they would have told you, but they won't, because the lie is in the silence, and it's that silence that erodes your reality, one omission at a time. Semantic infiltration. Semantic infiltration is a deceptive psychological tactic that manipulates perception by slipping emotionally charged or ideologically loaded language into everyday communication until the words themselves shape your thoughts, beliefs, and behavior without you ever realizing it. It's not about what is true, but what sounds true. The goal is to change the way people think by changing the words they unconsciously accept. This tactic is used by propagandists, politicians, cult leaders, corporations, and manipulators who understand that language doesn't just describe reality, it creates it. When you begin using their terms, you begin seeing the world through their lens. You stop questioning the foundation of the conversation and start debating within it, which is exactly what they want. Imagine someone constantly refers to a surveillance program as a security measure, or calls war peacekeeping, or labels emotional abuse as tough love. You start using those words too, and soon your emotional responses shift. Security feels comforting. Tough love sounds noble. You don't even realize your values are being rewritten because the language feels familiar, neutral, even good. That's semantic infiltration at work, the quiet, almost invisible invasion of your cognitive map. Manipulators use this to frame conversations in their favor before they even begin. They don't argue facts. They rename the facts. They label your hesitation as fear, your boundaries as selfishness, your anger as drama. And when you accept those labels, even just once, the damage begins. You doubt yourself. You adjust. You stop resisting, not because they convinced you, but because they changed the battlefield. This is why cults use special terms for outsiders, why marketing calls consumers communities, and why abusers say things like, "I just have high standards," instead of, "I'm controlling." The moment you accept their words, you're already in their world, and you won't see the manipulation because the language itself feels right. What makes semantic infiltration terrifying is its subtlety. There are no threats, no demands, just words. But those words shape narratives, and those narratives shape choices. By the time you feel the pressure, it's too late to notice that your beliefs weren't changed by argument, but by the slow, quiet infection of meaning. Boundary erosion. Boundary erosion is a slow, calculated psychological tactic used to break down a person's limits without them realizing it, until their sense of self is compromised and their defenses are gone. It's not an explosion, it's a drip. One request here, one joke there, one just this once, that turns into, "Why are you being so difficult?" over and over again. It's manipulation in its quietest, most corrosive form. At the beginning, it feels harmless. Someone asks for a small favor that makes you slightly uncomfortable. You say yes, not wanting to make a scene. Later, they take a little more. Maybe they make a comment that crosses a line. Sexually, emotionally, socially. You freeze for a second, unsure how to respond. They laugh it off or say, "You're too sensitive." And just like that, your line has been moved. That's the poison of boundary erosion. The abuser never jumps straight to the core. They chip away slowly, methodically, always framing their invasions as normal, justified, or even loving. "I only check your messages because I care." You don't need privacy if you have nothing to hide. You're overreacting. It was just a joke. Each line crossed weakens your confidence. Your inner voice that once said, "This doesn't feel right," grows quieter each time you ignore it to keep the peace. What makes this tactic so insidious is how it reshapes your reality through emotional fatigue. Over time, you begin to second-guess your right to even have boundaries. You may start apologizing for expressing discomfort. You tell yourself you're being dramatic, selfish, ungrateful. Meanwhile, the manipulator becomes more entitled, more invasive, and more in control. This isn't about compromise, it's about conquest. Bit by bit, you become someone who tolerates things you once would have walked away from. Your body tightens when they enter the room. Your mind races before you speak, and still you think, maybe it's just me. That's the final blow. When the boundary erosion has worked, you no longer defend yourself, not because you can't, but because you don't believe you're allowed to. You've been trained to betray your own limits, all while smiling to keep things calm. Love bombing is a psychological manipulation technique that hides its claws inside affection, intensity, and overwhelming attention. At first, it feels like a dream, like you finally found someone who sees you, cherishes you, chooses you without hesitation. They shower you with compliments, constant messages, long confessions of love, and grand gestures. You're the center of their world. You feel special, chosen, safe. But beneath the flood of adoration lies a calculated trap. This isn't love. It's control dressed as passion. The purpose of love bombing is not to give, it's to hook. It overwhelms your emotional defenses, floods your nervous system with dopamine, and pulls you into rapid dependency before you've had time to think. Healthy relationships build trust gradually. Love bombing speeds past boundaries, accelerating intimacy at a dangerous pace, all while keeping you too emotionally intoxicated to notice the red flags. The manipulator studies your needs, your wounds, your insecurities, your desires, and reflects back the exact version of the partner you've always hoped for. They say things like, "I've never felt this way about anyone," "We're soulmates," or "I can't live without you," within days or weeks. It feels like destiny, but it's not about you. It's about what they can get from you once you're addicted to the high, because the high always ends. After the love bombing phase, the affection becomes inconsistent. They pull away, criticize you, withhold attention, or make you feel like you're losing the magic unless you start chasing it, proving yourself, earning back what once came freely. Suddenly, you're working for crumbs of validation from the same person who once drowned you in it. And that's the second phase of the trap, emotional conditioning. You remember how they made you feel in the beginning, and now you'll do anything to feel it again. You blame yourself. You try harder. You excuse the emotional whiplash, hoping for the return of the person who made you feel alive. But that version never existed. It was bait. Love bombing isn't affection. It's warfare. The intensity isn't real connection. It's manipulation through fantasy. And once you're inside the cycle, the silence hurts more than the lies ever did. Information, withholding information. Withholding is a psychological manipulation tactic rooted in deliberate silence. It's the conscious decision to keep someone in the dark, not by lying, but by refusing to share critical truths that would allow them to make informed choices, protect themselves, or understand the situation they're in. And what makes it so cruel is that the victim often doesn't even know it's happening until it's too late. This tactic is subtle, strategic, and deeply effective. It's not what you hear that shapes your reality. It's what you don't. A partner knows something that could change how you feel about them, but chooses to spare your feelings. A boss withholds updates that affect your work, then blames you for not knowing. A friend conveniently forgets to tell you something they told everyone else. These gaps in truth aren't random, they're crafted. The manipulator isn't silent because they forgot. They're silent because knowledge is power, and keeping you uninformed keeps you powerless. It traps you in a space of uncertainty where you can't trust your own judgment because you're missing essential pieces of the puzzle. Your instincts whisper that something feels off, but you can't prove it. You question your gut, your memory, your worth. What makes information withholding emotionally devastating is its ability to erode trust without confrontation. The manipulator gets to appear innocent. They didn't lie. They didn't yell. They simply didn't say anything. And when you confront them, you're met with feigned confusion. I didn't think it mattered. You never asked. Or the classic, I was protecting you. Suddenly, you're the one who feels unreasonable for wanting the truth. In relationships, this tactic breaks intimacy while pretending to preserve it. It creates emotional distance. You begin to doubt what you know, and worse, what you deserve to know. The manipulator becomes the gatekeeper of truth, and you become dependent on their selective storytelling for a sense of reality. It's the quietest kind of control, not loud, not violent, just empty air where truth should be. And in that emptiness, fear grows, confusion grows, doubt grows, until one day you realize you weren't loved, supported, or respected. You were managed, kept just informed enough to stay close, but never enough to feel free. Guilt tripping. Guilt tripping is a psychological weapon that doesn't need shouting, threats, or force. It only needs your conscience. It is the art of turning your sense of morality, responsibility, or love against you, making you feel like the villain simply for having needs, boundaries, or independence. This tactic works by making you feel bad for something you shouldn't feel bad about, and then using that emotion to control you. It starts with subtle comments, sighs, or emotional withdrawals. You say no, and they say, I guess I'll just do it myself. Like always, you speak up for yourself, and they respond with, after everything I've done for you. They don't need to attack you directly. They just plant the seed, and that seed grows into shame, into self-doubt, into the aching need to make things right, even when you've done nothing wrong. That's the trap. Guilt tripping hijacks your empathy. The manipulator knows you care, so they weaponize that care. They paint themselves as the victim of your choices, no matter how justified or healthy those choices are. Suddenly, saying I need space makes you selfish. Prioritizing your mental health means you're abandoning them. They twist the narrative so you're the one who ends up apologizing for simply trying to protect yourself. The worst part is, guilt tripping often comes from people you love. Parents, partners, friends, people who know exactly where your emotional pressure points are. They don't ask directly, they imply. They don't argue, they withdraw love. And when they see the remorse in your eyes, the softening of your voice, the weakening of your resolve, they know it worked. You comply, not out of agreement, but out of guilt. And in doing so, you reinforce the very behavior that's manipulating you. Every time you give in, you teach them that all they have to do is hurt your heart a little, and they'll get what they want. This isn't emotional honesty, it's emotional extortion. It's designed to make you betray yourself so they don't have to feel uncomfortable. And once you learn to carry guilt that isn't yours, it becomes a leash they pull whenever you try to walk away. Disqualification. Push-pull. Disqualification, commonly known as the push-pull technique, is a psychological manipulation tactic designed to create intense emotional dependence by sending mixed signals: closeness followed by sudden distance, affection followed by coldness, validation followed by rejection. It's emotional whiplash, and it's not accidental. It's a deliberate strategy to keep you chasing approval you can never quite catch. It starts with the pull. The manipulator showers you with attention, admiration, charm. They make you feel special, chosen. You begin to believe you're safe in their presence. You drop your guard, you invest. Then, just as the bond begins to feel real, they push you away. They withdraw emotionally. They criticize you, mock you, go silent, or suddenly become cold and distant, and you're left spinning. What did I do wrong? What changed? Why did they turn on me? That confusion is exactly the point. Your nervous system goes into overdrive. You try harder. You apologize even when you didn't do anything wrong. You chase that initial high, the warmth, the attention, the connection, like an addict trying to recreate the first hit. And every now and then, just as you're about to give up, they pull you back in. A kind word, a thoughtful gesture, a moment of softness. Your heart leaps. Maybe things are okay again. But they never are. Not for long. This back and forth dynamic becomes your new emotional reality. The push makes you feel insecure, while the pull gives temporary relief. So your brain ties comfort to the person who also caused the pain. And that's the manipulation. They become the wound and the bandage. You don't see them as toxic. You see them as salvation. You cling to them not because you feel good, but because you felt good once and desperately want it back. Disqualification turns your self-esteem into a yo-yo, rising and falling at their whim. They may tease you under the guise of flirting, give you praise followed by a sharp dig, or act possessive one day and indifferent the next. Every push undermines your confidence. Every pull gives you just enough hope to stay. It's calculated inconsistency, weaponized to make you doubt yourself, question your worth, and stay hooked on someone who keeps rewriting the rules of connection just to stay in control. Micro-invalidations. Micro-invalidations are subtle, often indirect dismissals that erode your sense of reality, identity, or experience, one small wound at a time. They don't look like outright cruelty. They're quiet, passive, often disguised as jokes, casual remarks, or even advice, but their power lies in repetition. Each one chips away at your confidence, your voice, your sense that you even have the right to feel what you feel. You say you're tired, and they say, you don't know what tired is. You express excitement about a goal, and they shrug, well, don't get your hopes up. You talk about something that hurts you, and they reply, that's just life. Everyone goes through it. You speak your truth, and they smile. You're being too sensitive. On their own, these comments may seem harmless, even normal, but that's exactly what makes them dangerous, because they're not loud enough to spark confrontation, but they're sharp enough to leave scars. And when they come from someone you trust, a parent, partner, friend, or mentor, the damage cuts even deeper. You begin to question yourself. Am I overreacting? Was that really a big deal? Maybe my feelings are too much. That's the trap. Micro-invalidations train you to shrink yourself, to doubt your emotions before you even express them. They teach you that your experiences aren't valid unless someone else approves of them. And over time, you internalize that message. You stop sharing. You suppress. You apologize for existing in your own story. The silence becomes protection and also your prison. Manipulators use this tactic with surgical precision. It lets them undercut your confidence without ever raising their voice. They appear reasonable, realistic, even well-meaning, but behind every subtle dismissal is the same message. You don't matter as much as you think you do. What makes micro-invalidation so insidious is that they never come all at once. They arrive in moments, repeated, normalized, and dismissed. But the damage accumulates like drops of poison in water. They eventually change the way you see yourself, quietly, permanently, and without leaving visible bruises. Forced teaming. Forced teaming is a covert psychological manipulation tactic where the manipulator creates a false sense of partnership with you by using language and behavior that implies shared fate, mutual goals, or aligned emotions, when in reality, there is none. It's the illusion of unity, manufactured solely to lower your defenses and fast-track your trust. And the most dangerous part? It often feels like someone being friendly. This tactic starts with subtle wording. We're in this together. Let's figure this out. Looks like we've got a little problem, don't we? The manipulator uses inclusive language, we, us, our, to manufacture closeness and align themselves with you, even when they're a stranger or outsider. That simple shift in language triggers a deep psychological reflex. Humans are tribal by nature. We're wired to protect those in our group, to bond with those who share our struggles. And that's the weapon. Forced teaming is often used in moments of vulnerability. A stranger offers to help you carry something, then says, "We make a good team." A coworker takes your idea, then says, "We're in this fight together, right?" A toxic partner gets caught lying and says, "We just have to fix this, you and me." Each time, your instincts nudge you to see them as an ally, even when your gut knows they're not. What makes forced teaming so sinister is how harmless it appears on the surface. It mimics connection without actually earning it. You feel pressure to reciprocate the illusion, to be polite, agreeable, cooperative. But behind that false sense of unity is a manipulator who wants something: your trust, your compliance, your silence. This technique is a favorite among predators and con artists because it fast-tracks intimacy. If they can get you to see them as us, you'll let them in, into your space, into your mind, into your decisions. And when things go wrong, they'll make you feel like you're both responsible. But the truth is, you were never on the same team. The connection was forged without consent. The alliance was spoken into existence, not built. And once you see it, you realize the we was never about you. It was always a strategy to get past your guard without ever earning your trust. Minimization. Minimization is a psychological manipulation technique that downplays the severity of your experiences, feelings, or pain in order to gain control, deflect responsibility, or silence confrontation. It doesn't deny what happened. It just tells you it wasn't that bad. And in doing so, it erodes your ability to trust your own perception of reality. You say something hurts you, and they say, "You're overreacting." You express anger, and they respond, "It was just a joke." You confront them about something serious, and they sigh, "I didn't mean it like that. You're too sensitive." You cry, and they coldly reply, "This again?" What makes minimization so insidious is its subtlety. It doesn't scream, it whispers, it gaslights without completely denying. It allows just enough of the truth to pass through so the manipulator appears reasonable, while stripping that truth of its meaning. It teaches you that your pain isn't valid unless someone else says it is. It teaches you to second-guess your emotional reality. Over time, you start shrinking your voice. You soften your words, question your instincts, and suppress your emotions before they ever leave your lips. Why? Because you already know the script. You already know your hurt will be met with dismissal, and so the silence becomes safer than the truth. Minimization is a favorite tool of abusers, narcissists, and toxic authority figures. It allows them to say, "I didn't hit you that hard. I was just stressed." It's not like I cheated on you. They shift the focus away from what they did and onto how you're reacting. Suddenly, the problem isn't their behavior, it's your response to it. And that is the core of minimization, turning their offense into your fault. This manipulation doesn't just cause emotional confusion, it creates emotional isolation. Because if someone you trust tells you over and over again that what you're feeling isn't real, eventually you start believing them. You start apologizing for your tears. You start saying it's fine when it's not. You downplay your own suffering to survive the relationship. But inside, the wound festers because it was real. It did hurt, and it was never just a joke. Future faking. Future faking is a manipulative psychological tactic where someone makes grand promises about the future to gain control, commitment, or emotional investment in the present without any intention of actually following through. It's hope weaponized, a dream dangled just far enough out of reach to keep you chasing it, even as reality tells you nothing is changing. It often begins during the honeymoon phase of a relationship, a job offer, or a sales pitch. You're told about all the amazing things that are just around the corner. We're going to move in together. You're on track for a big promotion. Someday, I'm going to give you everything you've ever wanted. These visions are painted in vivid detail, so vivid you can already feel them. You get emotionally attached to a future that hasn't happened, and worse, probably never will. What makes future faking so dangerous is how deeply it exploits human psychology. We're naturally drawn to hope. We crave meaning, purpose, and something to believe in. The manipulator knows this. They don't need to show up fully in the present because they've sold you a future version of themselves, the one who will be ready, will commit, will change. So you stay, you wait, you invest, you shrink your own needs for the sake of what might be. But that future keeps getting pushed further out. There's always a reason why now isn't the right time. There's always something you need to fix, something they need to figure out. And every time you get close to calling it out, they drop another fantasy. We're almost there. I'm working on it. You just have to be patient. These promises become emotional currency, just enough to buy your silence, your loyalty, your time. Over time, the gap between their words and their actions becomes a chasm, but you cling to the hope they gave you because giving up means admitting you were lied to, that your love, your effort, your belief was used as leverage, that you fell for a version of someone that never truly existed, and so you stay, not for who they are, but for the fantasy of who they said they'd become, not because they showed up, but because they promised they would. Silent treatment. The silent treatment is one of the most psychologically cruel manipulation tactics because it punishes you with absence, not of presence, but of emotional connection. It is the deliberate withdrawal of communication, affection, and acknowledgement used to create uncertainty, guilt, and desperation in the person being targeted. On the surface, it looks like someone just needs space, but in truth, it's about control. This isn't quiet, it's calculated. The silence is not peaceful, it's loud with meaning. It says, "You are invisible, you are not worth my words, you don't matter enough for me to acknowledge." And that absence cuts deeper than any scream ever could. It leaves you pacing mentally, replaying every interaction, obsessing over what you did wrong, and scrambling to fix something that's never clearly explained. That's the power of the silent treatment. It makes you beg for resolution, even when they cause the damage. In the beginning, it often comes after a disagreement. Instead of communicating, they shut down completely. No eye contact, no messages, no affection, no closure. You reach out, they ignore. You apologize, they remain cold. And the longer it goes on, the more it shreds your emotional stability. Your self-worth begins to depend on breaking the silence. You start doubting your reality. You convince yourself you're the problem because the punishment feels so severe. But the silent treatment isn't about solving the conflict. It's about asserting dominance. It's emotional starvation. The manipulator knows that humans are wired to seek connection, that our brains treat social rejection like physical pain. So they exploit that vulnerability by making you suffer in the silence, knowing that the longer it lasts, the more compliant you'll be when it finally breaks. And when it does break, when they finally speak to you again, it feels like relief, like rescue. You're so grateful for the end of the torment that you don't question the method. You accept the unspoken lesson. Speak less, demand less, trigger less, just so you don't get frozen out again. That's how the silent treatment trains you, not through violence, but through void, not by breaking you loudly, but by disappearing just long enough for you to break yourself. Moral licensing. Moral licensing is a psychological trap. where doing something good gives someone perceived permission to do something bad, as if their past virtue creates a moral credit they can now spend. In manipulation, this becomes a weapon. The manipulator uses their previous acts of kindness, generosity, or morality to shield, justify, or excuse harmful behavior. It's the ultimate emotional bait and switch. Look at all I've done for you. How could you accuse me of this? This tactic doesn't just distort behavior, it distorts judgment. A partner who once showed immense love and sacrifice now uses that memory like armor. When they lie, you forgive them because they once defended you. When they ignore your needs, you hesitate to complain because they're not a bad person. They've done so much for me. But that's the trap. Your mind begins weighing the past against the present instead of seeing what's happening now. Moral licensing creates emotional confusion. You feel guilty for being hurt. You doubt yourself for noticing the manipulation. You minimize your feelings because their past goodness looms over your current pain, and the manipulator leans into that hesitation. After everything I've done, you're seriously going to question me? I've been there for you. One mistake and suddenly I'm the villain? They don't take accountability. They cash in on your loyalty. In more public or professional spaces, this tactic becomes even more insidious. Leaders, bosses, or authority figures will point to their track record of fairness or altruism to mask exploitation or abuse. I support everyone. You know that. I've always been ethical. Meanwhile, their current actions tell another story, one they expect you to ignore. The terrifying part of moral licensing is how it can take root in your own psyche. You begin excusing mistreatment because it doesn't match your image of the person. You start negotiating your pain. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe I'm being ungrateful. Slowly, your boundaries erode, not through threats, but through remembered kindness. The truth is, good deeds don't cancel bad behavior, but moral licensing makes it feel like they do. It turns virtue into camouflage and makes you feel like you're the one who's being unfair for noticing the betrayal behind it. Tactical ignorance. Tactical ignorance is the deliberate act of pretending not to notice, know, or understand something in order to manipulate outcomes, avoid accountability, or force others into overcompensating. It's not genuine confusion, it's strategic silence. It's the weaponization of "I didn't know," used by people who absolutely did know, but chose to play dumb because it keeps them in power while making you feel crazy, burdensome, or responsible. This manipulation is particularly effective because it hides in plain sight. It's incredibly difficult to call out someone who just acts confused. They don't have to lie outright. They simply omit, delay, deflect. And while you're wasting time explaining, repeating yourself, or desperately seeking clarity, they sit back and watch you unravel, because the goal of tactical ignorance isn't to understand, it's to exhaust. They forget your boundaries, even though you've clearly stated them. They misinterpret your emotions, even though you've explained them more than once. They ignore obvious problems, consequences, or needs while insisting, "I didn't realize it was that serious." It's not clumsiness, it's control. Every time you repeat yourself, every time you explain your pain again, they gain more leverage. They make you the one who looks overly emotional, irrational, or demanding. This tactic thrives in relationships where there's an imbalance of power. A partner doesn't follow through on what they promised, and when confronted, they say, "Oh, I didn't know that mattered so much to you." A boss doesn't address your concerns, but later claims, "I wasn't aware you felt that way." A parent overlooks your trauma and then says, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" They knew, but acknowledging it would require responsibility, and tactical ignorance is the perfect escape hatch. It works because it manipulates expectations. You assume they didn't mean harm. You give the benefit of the doubt. You question whether you made yourself clear. And while you're tangled in your own self-doubt, they remain untouched, smiling, innocent, protected by the veil of not knowing. But make no mistake, Tactical ignorance is not ignorance at all. It's emotional theater, carefully played to keep the blame off them and the burden on you. The less they claim to understand, the more you give, and the more you give, the more they win, by pretending they don't even know there was a game. Flooding, overwhelm tactic. Flooding, also known as the overwhelm tactic, is a psychological manipulation strategy where the abuser bombards you with excessive information, intense emotion, rapid-fire demands, or chaotic behavior all at once to disorient your thinking and shut down your ability to resist. It's not designed to hurt you outright. It's designed to overload your brain until it breaks your will. It's emotional shock warfare disguised as urgency. This tactic often comes out of nowhere. One moment, things seem calm. The next, you're hit with a sudden outburst, a flood of accusations, dramatic gestures, or an avalanche of expectations you're somehow supposed to meet right now. You don't have time to think, let alone respond clearly. Your nervous system goes into panic mode, fight, flight, or freeze. And most often, you freeze. That paralysis is the goal. In a state of overwhelm, your critical thinking shuts down. Your need for peace overrides your need for truth. So you concede, you apologize, you agree to things you don't fully understand. You submit just to make it stop. But the manipulator isn't chaotic by accident. They're performing chaos to force submission. Their intensity isn't a loss of control. It is the control. Flooding is used by abusers during arguments to dominate the narrative, yelling so loudly or rapidly that you can't get a word in. It's used in toxic workplaces where unreasonable deadlines, stacked meetings, and last-minute demands keep you so busy you can't reflect on what's fair. It's used in love bombing too, lavishing you with praise, gifts, and intensity so quickly you mistake it for genuine connection instead of manipulation. It's all flooding. And over time, this tactic creates conditioning. You begin avoiding confrontation altogether. You walk on eggshells. You try to manage everything ahead of time to prevent another emotional ambush. You don't speak your needs. You suppress them to avoid the flood. That silence becomes a form of self-betrayal, all born from a survival instinct the manipulator engineered. What makes flooding terrifying is its invisibility. To outsiders, it might just look like a heated conversation, a demanding boss, a passionate partner, but to you, it's emotional drowning. And every time you survive it, you come out a little more exhausted, a little more compliant, and a lot more unsure of your right to breathe. Bait and blame. Bait and blame is a psychological manipulation tactic that lures you into reacting emotionally, defensively, or even just honestly, only to twist your response into proof that you are the problem. It's the emotional equivalent of a trap, baited with provocation and set to snap the moment you speak up. This isn't just about starting conflict. It's about creating a no-win scenario where you are punished for simply responding. It often begins with something small, a passive-aggressive comment, a vague accusation, a loaded question designed to poke at your vulnerabilities. Maybe they say, "It must be nice not to care," or "Some people just don't know how to be grateful." You feel the sting, the confusion, the pressure to defend yourself. That's the bait. And when you take it, when you react, explain, get upset, or stand up for yourself, they strike. "Wow, you're so sensitive. I was just trying to have a conversation. See, this is why I can't talk to you." Now, you're no longer the victim of their cruelty. You're the cause of the drama. This tactic is designed to provoke you into emotional vulnerability and then use that vulnerability against you. It flips the script. Suddenly, they're calm and reasonable, and you're hysterical or defensive. They get to walk away feeling justified while you're left confused, ashamed, and questioning your own behavior. And that confusion, that's the real damage, because it keeps you stuck in the cycle. You begin walking on eggshells, fearing that anything you say could be turned against you. You suppress your truth to avoid being cast as the attacker. You learn to self-censor, to anticipate their blame before it comes, to live in a state of preemptive guilt. This is how the manipulator stays in control, by making every reaction feel like an overreaction, every boundary feel like betrayal. What makes bait and blame so cruel is that it uses your honesty as ammunition. It tricks you into exposing yourself emotionally, then punishes you for it. Over time, you stop reacting, not because you've healed, but because you've been conditioned to fear the consequences of being real. You no longer trust your voice. You no longer trust your feelings. And that silence, the one they baited you into, is exactly what they wanted. Controlled confusion. Controlled confusion is a psychological manipulation tactic where a person deliberately creates chaos, mixed messages, or contradictory information to destabilize your sense of reality and make you easier to control. It's not about miscommunication. It's strategic miscommunication. It's keeping you mentally off balance, just enough to make you question yourself and rely on them for clarity. The manipulator might tell you one thing and then act in a completely opposite way. They might praise you, then criticize you seconds later. They rewrite past conversations. They contradict themselves and deny it. They give vague answers, speak in riddles, or shift the subject when you're close to the truth. You're left chasing meaning, trying to decipher what was real and what was manipulation. And that's the trap. While you're busy trying to decode the confusion, you stop noticing the control. This tactic works because the human brain craves coherence. When something doesn't add up, our minds automatically try to resolve the contradiction. We blame ourselves first. Did I hear it wrong? Did I overreact? Did I forget something? And that doubt makes us vulnerable. The manipulator becomes the only stable source in the fog of confusion, except they're the one who created the fog to begin with. Controlled confusion is used in abusive relationships, toxic workplaces, cults, and even high-pressure sales tactics. It's how abusers maintain dominance without ever needing to scream or threaten. They use cognitive overload to exhaust you into compliance. You stop fighting because you're too tired to make sense of anything. You start agreeing just to make the mental chaos stop. It becomes harder to trust your instincts. You hesitate before asking questions because you fear being shamed, mocked, or spun into another web of contradictions. You begin to rely on them to interpret reality for you. And that's when they've won. Because when someone can define what's real for you, they don't just influence your decisions, they own your mind. Controlled confusion is not loud, it's not obvious. It's the soft, constant erosion of certainty. And by the time you realize how twisted the world has become, you're no longer sure whether to trust your memory, your feelings, or even your own truth. Because every time you tried, they convinced you it was wrong. Identity undermining identity. Undermining is a deeply insidious manipulation tactic that doesn't just aim to hurt, it aims to erase. It's the slow, deliberate process of chipping away at someone's sense of self until they no longer recognize who they are without the approval, control, or validation of the manipulator. This isn't just emotional abuse, it's psychological rewriting. At first, it's subtle. Little comments about your personality, your habits, your appearance, your dreams. You're so dramatic. You always overthink everything. You're not really the creative type. You think you're better than everyone, don't you? These words don't land as insults. They're disguised as concern, jokes, or feedback. But they're surgical, targeted, and when repeated over time, they begin to stick. You start questioning yourself. You pull back from the things that once gave you joy. You hesitate before speaking, dressing a certain way, setting goals. You silence parts of yourself, not because you want to, but because someone made you feel like those parts were wrong. Too much, not enough, embarrassing, flawed. This is identity undermining. When someone deconstructs your sense of worth piece by piece until your confidence isn't just damaged, it's dependent on their opinion. You begin to seek their permission to exist as yourself. You ask if your feelings are valid. You defer to their judgment, even on things you once knew with certainty. And the more you comply, the smaller you become. What makes this tactic so dangerous is its invisibility. It doesn't come with screaming or slamming doors. It comes with quiet correction, constant truth-telling, a mirror that only reflects your flaws. And every time you try to reclaim a part of yourself, they push back. You've changed. This isn't you. Where's the person I fell in love with? The irony is, they're the one who changed you. They broke you down and then blamed you for not being whole. Over time, your identity becomes so enmeshed with their approval that being yourself feels like betrayal. And that's when they've won, not by controlling your actions, but by making you forget that you ever had the right to choose who you are. You don't just lose confidence, you lose you. Victim playing is a deeply manipulative psychological tactic where someone pretends to be the wronged or wounded party, not out of genuine suffering, but as a way to deflect accountability, gain sympathy, and seize control of a situation. It is not vulnerability. It is weaponized weakness, and it works because it hijacks one of our strongest instincts, the desire to protect those who are in pain. At first, it's almost impossible to spot. The manipulator comes across as hurt, misunderstood, or mistreated. They cry, sulk, or retreat. They say things like, "I guess I'm always the bad guy," or "I try so hard and it's never enough." Their voice cracks, their eyes water, but underneath the performance is a sharp, calculated goal to flip the power dynamic so that you become the one apologizing, comforting, and backing down, even if they were the one who crossed the line. The genius of victim playing lies in how it reframes the entire narrative. Suddenly, their betrayal becomes your insensitivity. Their aggression becomes a reaction to being hurt. Their manipulation is rebranded as self-defense. And the more empathetic you are, the easier you are to trap, because your compassion becomes the leash they pull on. In relationships, this tactic makes you feel like the villain for having boundaries. If you confront them, they act crushed. If you ask for change, they accuse you of being demanding or cold. Over time, you begin censoring yourself just to avoid hurting them. You tiptoe around the truth, give more than you should, and apologize for pain you didn't cause. And the most dangerous part, it works even when you know it's manipulation, because guilt doesn't respond to logic. Watching someone crumble in front of you triggers the primal urge to fix, to soothe, to make it okay. The manipulator knows this. That's why they reach for tears instead of honesty. That's why they rehearse hurt instead of admitting fault. They don't need to be right. They just need to be pitied, because pity disarms. It silences anger, confuses accountability, and keeps you emotionally handcuffed to someone who will hurt you, then cry about it when you try to leave. False consensus trick. The false consensus trick is a subtle but powerful psychological manipulation that works by making you believe that everyone agrees with the manipulator, everyone but you. It's designed to isolate, pressure, and mentally corner you into compliance by creating the illusion that your thoughts, feelings, or boundaries are not just wrong, they're abnormal. And when you feel like the outlier in a crowd, your instinct is to doubt yourself, not the crowd. This trick doesn't need facts, it needs suggestion. Everyone thinks you're being too sensitive. Most people would have let it go by now. Honestly, you're the only one who sees it that way. These phrases are seeds planted in your mind. They tell you, you're alone in this, you're overreacting, you're the problem. And when someone you care about, especially a partner, a parent, a friend, uses this language, it hits harder. You don't just feel misunderstood, you feel defective. The false consensus trick preys on one of the deepest human fears, being rejected by the tribe. We are wired for social survival, which means we instinctively want to belong. So when someone makes us feel like our opinion is out of sync with what everyone else believes, we start shrinking. We silence ourselves. We second-guess our instincts. We conform, not because we're convinced, but because we're afraid to be wrong alone. Manipulators use this tactic to avoid accountability. If you challenge them, they don't argue the truth. They weaponize public opinion, even if they have no evidence of it. They create invisible armies of approval behind them and make you feel like you're up against all of them. They might even reference imaginary others, friends, exes, co-workers, who allegedly agree with their perspective. But those people never show up. They never speak, because they may not exist. What makes this trick so effective is its subtle cruelty. It doesn't directly attack you. It turns the entire world against you in your mind. And once you start believing that your voice is the only dissenting one, you stop using it. It's not about changing your mind. It's about isolating your truth until it feels like madness. Deliberate misinterpretation. Deliberate misinterpretation is a manipulation tactic where someone intentionally twists your words, intentions, or actions into something entirely different, usually negative, so they can gain control, derail the conversation, or place blame onto you. It's psychological sabotage disguised as misunderstanding, and the more you try to clarify, the deeper you sink into their trap. It often begins with a simple statement. You express a boundary, you voice discomfort, you share a concern, but instead of engaging with what you actually said, the manipulator responds to a distorted version of it. You say, "I felt hurt when you ignored me," and they reply, "So now I'm a terrible person who can't do anything right?" You say, "I need some time to think," and they accuse you of abandonment. They don't respond to you. They respond to the straw man they've created and then punish you for it. This tactic is especially effective because it forces you onto the defensive. You find yourself explaining, rephrasing, apologizing for a meaning you never intended. But every attempt to clarify only gives them more material to twist. They don't want to understand you. They want to control the narrative. And by misinterpreting your words, they turn you into the aggressor and themselves into the victim. Deliberate misinterpretation is common in emotionally abusive relationships, where communication becomes a minefield. You start speaking in measured, filtered sentences, terrified of being misunderstood. You begin internalizing their false interpretations, thinking, maybe I wasn't clear, maybe I did sound angry, maybe it is my fault. But that confusion isn't accidental, it's engineered. The manipulator uses this tactic to avoid accountability. If they can misinterpret your feelings as attacks, then they don't have to face their behavior. If they can make your vulnerability look like manipulation, then they don't have to show empathy. They weaponize language itself, turning every word into a potential liability. Over time, you may stop speaking up altogether. The emotional cost becomes too high. You silence yourself not because you're wrong, but because being right never matters, not when your words are constantly twisted into weapons against you. And that's exactly where they want you, quiet, unsure, and easier to control. Anchoring negative emotions. Anchoring negative emotions is a manipulative, psychological tactic that programs someone to associate specific people, places, phrases, or behaviors with emotional pain, so that even neutral or innocent situations begin to feel threatening. It's psychological conditioning at its most invasive. It doesn't just influence your choices, it rewires your emotional reflexes, and over time, you'll start reacting with anxiety, shame, or fear, not because of what's happening, but because of what you've been trained to feel. The manipulator creates emotional anchors by pairing ordinary moments with moments of distress. They might humiliate you right after you express joy. They might start a fight every time you go out with friends. They might go cold every time you succeed at something. Eventually, your nervous system makes the connection. Happiness equals punishment. Success equals conflict. Speaking up equals silence. Without realizing it, you begin avoiding the very things that once made you feel alive. That's how anchoring works. It doesn't need logic. It only needs repetition. The more often a negative emotion is paired with a specific trigger, the stronger the emotional anchor becomes. A phrase like, "we need to talk," starts making your stomach drop. A certain tone of voice makes your hands sweat. Even a room in your home becomes something you dread. And soon, the manipulator doesn't even have to do anything. Your body responds to the anchors on autopilot. This tactic is especially sinister because it bypasses rational thinking. You can tell yourself that you're safe, that you have nothing to feel guilty about, but your body still flinches. The emotional associations have already been forged, and the more you respond with fear, silence, or compliance, the deeper those anchors sink. It's a slow erasure of emotional freedom. The manipulator now has control without ever needing to raise their voice. They've trained you like a dog with invisible electric fences. You avoid behaviors not because you can't do them, but because you dread what happens when you do. You start living smaller. You start doubting the places, people, and parts of yourself that once brought joy. And that's the real goal of anchoring negative emotions, not just to control what you do, but to make you afraid to be who you are. Ingratiation is a psychological manipulation tactic that hides domination behind the mask of charm. It's the calculated use of flattery, helpfulness, and apparent admiration to lower your defenses, win your trust, and make you feel valued, only to later use that connection to exploit, guilt, or control you. It's not kindness. It's a transaction, and you're the product. The manipulator doesn't start with demands or pressure. They start by making you feel special. They compliment your intelligence, your work ethic, your strength. They offer to help you just because. They remember tiny details about you that make you feel seen. This attention feels like validation, and you welcome it. You let them in, often without realizing how fast they got close. Because it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like finally being appreciated. But beneath the surface, every gesture is strategic. Every compliment has a goal. Every favor plants a seed. You owe me. The manipulator is not giving. They're investing. And the return they expect is access, loyalty, influence. They make themselves indispensable to you so that when they eventually ask for something, your time, your silence, your compromise, you feel pressure to say yes. Refusing doesn't just feel awkward, it feels wrong, like a betrayal. Ingratiation thrives in environments where people crave approval, workplaces, social circles, romantic beginnings, places where status and acceptance matter. The manipulator mirrors your values, echoes your language, plays the perfect friend, the ideal teammate, the supportive partner. But over time, the charm reveals its edge. The compliments become conditional. The favors are followed by guilt trips. The warmth turns icy when you resist. What makes ingratiation so dangerous is how good it feels. At first, it targets your hunger to be seen, heard, and affirmed. It makes you feel lucky to have someone like them in your life. You never see the trap until you're already in it, because the person who once praised your independence now criticizes you for not needing anyone. The one who loved how strong you are now calls you cold when you set a boundary. Their admiration becomes a leash. It wasn't love, it was leverage. It wasn't generosity, it was groundwork. And the moment you stop serving their agenda, the flattery vanishes, and the real person, the one who was hiding behind all that praise, steps into the light. Emotional blackmail. Emotional blackmail is a psychological manipulation tactic that uses fear, guilt, and obligation to force you into compliance, not through direct threats, but through emotional pressure, so intense it feels like betrayal to resist. It's not about convincing you, it's about cornering you. The manipulator doesn't say, "Do this or else." They say, "If you loved me, you would." Or, "After everything I've done for you, how could you?" And suddenly, saying no doesn't just feel like setting a boundary, it feels like destroying a relationship. This tactic is devastating because it uses your own emotions as the weapon. It takes your empathy, your loyalty, your compassion, and turns them against you. It forces you to choose between your needs and someone else's approval. And when you're being emotionally blackmailed, there is no right answer. Give in and you feel used. Push back and you're labeled selfish, cold, ungrateful. It often starts subtly. A partner might say, "I guess I'll just be alone forever if you leave." A parent might sigh, "I sacrificed everything for you, and this is how you repay me." A friend might warn, "If you don't take my side, don't expect me to be around when you need someone." These aren't just statements. They're emotional traps. Say the wrong thing, and you're made to feel like a monster. You weren't forced, but you were emotionally cornered. What makes emotional blackmail so dangerous is its illusion of intimacy. It often comes from people you care about most, those who know exactly what buttons to press. They don't need to yell. They just imply what will happen if you don't obey. Withdrawal of love, affection, access, or stability. And because you fear losing that connection, you comply. Not because it's right, but because you're afraid. Over time, you begin to feel responsible for their moods, their pain, their happiness. You sacrifice your truth to preserve peace. You silence your instincts to avoid disappointment. And each time you give in, you reinforce the belief that their love is conditional and that your worth depends on keeping them satisfied. But real love doesn't require emotional ransom. Real love doesn't make you pay in guilt. Emotional blackmail does, and it does it with a smile. Feigning ignorance. Feigning ignorance is a psychological manipulation tactic where someone pretends not to know, understand, or remember something in order to avoid accountability, stall confrontation, or shift the emotional burden onto you. It's not genuine confusion, it's strategic amnesia. It's a way to play dumb while staying in control, and it leaves you exhausted, second-guessing, and doing all the emotional labor they refuse to touch. The manipulator knows exactly what they did. They remember the promise they made, the boundary they crossed, the thing they said that made your stomach drop. But when you bring it up, their face goes blank. They blink, they hesitate. "Wait, what are you talking about? I don't remember saying that. That's not how I understood it." The moment you need clarity, they offer fog. This tactic is infuriating because it turns truth into a maze. You're left holding not just your own emotions, but now also the burden of having to explain reality to someone who's pretending not to grasp it. The more you try to pin down what happened, the more they squirm out of reach, using your rising frustration as proof that you're the unstable one. You become the overreactor, the accuser, the one who's making a big deal out of nothing. Feigning ignorance is especially cruel because it's passive. There's no yelling, no insults, just a shrug, a vacant look, a quiet refusal to meet you in the truth. And yet, the psychological impact is devastating. It makes you feel invisible, invalidated, like your experiences don't matter because someone can erase them just by pretending they never happened. It's often used in toxic relationships to avoid emotional responsibility. A partner forgets the agreement they made. A friend claims they didn't realize their comment was hurtful. A coworker suddenly misunderstood their role in a failed project. But they didn't forget. They just know that pretending to forget keeps you confused and them untouchable. What makes feigning ignorance so dangerous is its believability. You want to believe they're just clueless, that they're trying, that they're not being cruel. But deep down, you feel it, the tension, the coldness in their deflection, the way they look past you while you're begging for resolution. Because if they can convince you they don't know what they're doing, they never have to stop doing it. Preemptive invalidation. Preemptive invalidation is a psychological manipulation tactic where someone dismisses your thoughts, feelings, or boundaries before you've even expressed them, cutting you off at the root and making you doubt yourself before you ever speak. It's a form of control that cloaks itself in anticipation, not reaction. and it tells you one chilling thing: your truth will not be welcomed here. It sounds like, "I already know what you're going to say. It's ridiculous. You're not going to start with your drama again, are you? You always blow things out of proportion." These statements are delivered before you've said a word, before you've had the chance to explain, question, or express. And that's the point. By assuming your emotional response and labeling it invalid before it happens, they silence you without ever needing to hear what's real. Preemptive invalidation is not just dismissal, it's psychological suffocation. It tells you, don't even try. Your thoughts are predictable, your feelings are wrong, your voice is unwelcome, and over time, you start to internalize that script. You hear their voice in your head before you speak. "They're right. I'm overthinking. I should just drop it." So you do. And each time you do, a piece of you disappears. This tactic is often used by people who fear being challenged, those who want emotional control without having to navigate accountability. By pre-labeling your emotions as irrational, dramatic, or selfish, they create an emotional battlefield where only their feelings are allowed to exist. You're reduced to a caricature before you can defend yourself. You become the crazy one, the needy one, the overly emotional one, even if you haven't said a thing. What makes preemptive invalidation so vicious is that it erases your autonomy before you even use it. It conditions you to silence your instincts, to mistrust your perception, to bury your emotions deep enough that they no longer threaten the comfort of the manipulator. You start censoring yourself, not because you're wrong, but because you've been trained to believe no one wants to hear you, not even you. Cognitive load disruption. Cognitive load disruption is a psychological manipulation technique designed to overwhelm your mental processing so thoroughly that you can no longer think critically, make sound decisions, or recognize manipulation in real time. It works by flooding your mind with too many thoughts, demands, or stimuli at once, disorienting your ability to separate signal from noise. The goal isn't to persuade you with reason, it's to confuse you into compliance. This tactic preys on one of the most vulnerable parts of your mind, your limited cognitive bandwidth. Human brains can only process so much information at once before clarity gives way to chaos. Manipulators know this, so they create mental static, fast-paced talking, contradictory instructions, rapid emotional shifts, non-stop texting, guilt-tripping while problem-solving, layering tasks on top of tension. Before you can question what's happening, you're already buried under it. Cognitive load disruption often appears in abusive arguments where you're bombarded with accusations, justifications, and irrelevant distractions all at once. You try to address one issue, and suddenly 5 more are thrown at you. You're stuck defending yourself from things you didn't even say. Logic disappears. You lose track of the original point. Eventually, you shut down, not because you agree, but because your brain is tired of trying to keep up. It's also used in high-pressure sales tactics, cult indoctrination, and workplace exploitation. Overload the target with charts, statistics, deadlines, moral language, or fear-based messaging until their resistance drops. When someone is too overwhelmed to think clearly, they'll say yes just to end the pressure. And manipulators weaponize that exhaustion to push decisions you never would have made with a clear head. The scariest part is how easy it is to confuse this with passion, urgency, or even care. The manipulator might appear intense, emotionally invested, or even frantic, but behind the performance is control. If you're busy trying to untangle the emotional chaos they've created, you're not asking the right questions. You're not saying no. You're not walking away. And once you're drained, they offer relief on their terms. You're grateful for the break, the clarity, the quiet, but you didn't find peace. You were flooded into submission. You didn't choose. You were too overloaded to resist. And that's exactly how they win, by making sure your mind is too full to recognize you're already losing yourself. Comparative devaluation. Comparative devaluation is a covert but brutal manipulation tactic that diminishes your worth by constantly comparing you to others, real or imagined, in order to create insecurity, control, and emotional dependence. It doesn't attack you directly. Instead, it cuts you down sideways through praise of someone else, and the message it sends is clear: you are not enough. The manipulator might say things like, "Why can't you be more like her? He never complains the way you do. My ex would have handled this better. Other people seem to appreciate me more." They make these comparisons casually, like passing comments, but each one lands like a punch, targeted, deliberate, and meant to bruise. The purpose isn't to compliment the other person. The purpose is to make you feel inadequate, replaceable, or defective, because the more insecure you feel, the harder you'll work to be better. The more you'll seek their approval, and the more power they gain. This tactic rewires your emotional instincts. Instead of feeling loved, you start feeling compared. Every choice you make becomes a competition. Every interaction becomes a test. You're constantly measuring yourself against someone else's highlight reel, carefully selected by the manipulator to make you feel smaller. It creates a hunger for validation that only they can feed, and they control when or if they give it. Comparative devaluation is especially damaging because it attacks your core identity. It doesn't just say, "You made a mistake." It says, "You are less than." Over time, you begin to internalize these comparisons. You question your value, your desirability, your intelligence, your very place in someone's life. You start to see yourself through their distorted lens, and you start to believe it. And just when your self-esteem starts to crack, they might throw you a breadcrumb of praise, making you chase the high of finally being enough. But it never lasts, because the point of comparative devaluation is to keep you striving, not succeeding, to make you feel like you're always just behind whoever they've placed on a pedestal, even if that person doesn't exist. It's not admiration, it's emotional sabotage masked as feedback, and its purpose isn't to inspire growth, it's to keep you insecure enough to stay. Idealization, devaluation, discard cycle. The idealization, devaluation, discard cycle is a manipulative psychological pattern used by narcissists and emotional abusers to gain complete control over a person by systematically building them up, breaking them down, and then throwing them away. It's not a relationship, it's a strategy, and it's designed to keep you emotionally addicted while stripping you of your identity. It begins with idealization, the love bombing phase. You're flooded with affection, admiration, attention. They call you perfect. They mirror your dreams, your values, your words. You feel seen like never before. The connection is intense, fast, intoxicating. It feels like fate, but it's not love. It's a hook. They're studying you, figuring out what makes you feel alive so they can use it to make you feel dependent. Then comes devaluation, and it hits like a punch to the soul. The same person who once worshipped you begins to criticize you, subtly at first, then cruelly. They mock your flaws, dismiss your feelings, ignore your needs. They shift the energy without explanation. You're left chasing the version of them who once made you feel safe. You start working harder, giving more, apologizing for things you didn't do, anything to get back to how it was. But it's never the same, because the pedestal they put you on was never real. It was a stage for your fall. The more you try to reclaim their love, the more they withdraw, until one day they enter the final phase, discard. They ghost you, replace you, blame you, or even worse, pretend you never mattered at all. You're left hollow, questioning everything. Was any of it real? You comb through memories, texts, gestures, searching for proof that the beginning wasn't a lie, but they've already moved on, either to the next target or into a new mask of perfection. What makes this cycle so devastating is how it's tailored to your deepest desires, then weaponized against you. You weren't loved. You were used as a mirror to reflect their fantasy. And once you stopped serving that fantasy, once you needed something back, they shattered the illusion and made you feel like you were the problem all along. And the worst part? You still miss them. Not for who they were, but for who they pretended to be. Plausible deniability framing. Plausible deniability framing is a manipulation tactic where a person deliberately crafts their words, actions, or intentions in a vague, indirect, or ambiguous way so that when they are called out, they can deny everything with a straight face. It's a psychological smokescreen. They act just close enough to the line to hurt, manipulate, or mislead you, but never so clearly that you can definitively prove it. And when you confront them, they flip the script. That's not what I meant. You're reading too much into it. I was just joking. This is gaslighting in a suit and tie. Clean, calculated, and maddening. You know what they said. You felt what they did. But they've framed it just vaguely enough that any accusation sounds like your problem. You look like the one who's overanalyzing, being too sensitive, or jumping to conclusions. They stay calm, collected, untouchable, while your reality starts to unravel. That's the cruelty of this tactic. It leaves you trapped between what happened and what you can't prove. It forces you into silence because every attempt to defend yourself makes you look unstable. And the more you question it, the more you start to question yourself. Maybe you did take it the wrong way. Maybe they really didn't mean it like that. Maybe you're the one turning nothing into something. But it's not nothing. It's precision cruelty, engineered to give them total control without ever owning a single consequence. This tactic is often used by narcissists, abusers, and manipulators who know the power of implication. They use facial expressions, tones, body language, and innocent wording to deliver emotional punches without leaving any fingerprints. It gives them the power to hurt you while still playing the victim or the saint. Plausible deniability isn't just a defense, it's part of the plan. They set the trap and stand just far enough away to claim they had nothing to do with it. And when you finally explode in frustration or pain, they'll step back, smile, and say, "Wow, I didn't realize you were so emotional." They get to win twice, once by wounding you, and again by making you doubt it ever happened. Truth sandwich technique. The truth sandwich technique is a deceptive manipulation tactic that disguises lies or harmful intentions between two layers of truth, making the falsehood easier to swallow and harder to detect. It's a psychological sleight of hand, mixing fact with fiction so seamlessly that the target internalizes the lie as truth simply because it feels true in context. It's not about convincing with logic, it's about disarming with structure. It works like this. The manipulator begins with a statement that's undeniably true, something you recognize and agree with. That's the first slice of truth. It builds rapport, earns trust, and sets the emotional tone. Then, nestled quietly in the middle, comes the distortion, the twist, the manipulation, the misinformation. By the time you realize it's there, you're already nodding along. And finally, they close with another piece of truth, a reassuring, familiar idea that reinforces everything they just said. That's the second slice. You're left with a full sandwich that feels credible, even if the center is rotten. Example, you know I've always supported your dreams. Truth, but lately your behavior has been selfish and ungrateful. Manipulation. Still, I care about you, and I just want what's best for us. Truth. That middle line hits harder because it's framed by warmth and familiarity. It doesn't feel like an attack, it feels like a caring observation, and so you believe it, or at least you stop defending yourself. The brilliance of this tactic lies in how it hijacks your emotional reasoning. When you're exposed to truth, your guard goes down. You stop scanning for danger. The lie slips in under your radar, and because it's sandwiched between things that feel safe and recognizable, your brain processes the entire message as trustworthy. In arguments, politics, relationships, and sales, manipulators use the truth sandwich to get you to accept something you would normally question. They exploit your pattern-seeking nature. If parts of what they're saying align with your memory or values, you instinctively give the rest a pass. What makes the truth sandwich so dangerous is its subtlety. You don't even realize you've eaten the lie until you're reacting to it, emotionally, behaviorally, relationally. You feel guilt, fear, or shame, and you don't even know why, because it didn't sound like manipulation. It sounded like someone who cares. Gaslight by proxy, is a chilling and deeply manipulative extension of gaslighting, where the manipulator recruits other people, friends, family, co-workers, even therapists, to reinforce their distorted version of reality and make you doubt your own. Instead of only twisting your perception one-on-one, they enlist third parties to validate their lies, discredit your experiences, and isolate you emotionally. It's not just gaslighting, it's psychological warfare with backup. It starts when the manipulator frames the narrative before you even get a chance to speak. They go to others and say things like, "She's been acting really unstable lately," or "He twists everything I say." They don't come off as cruel. They play the concerned victim. They plant seeds, and by the time you start telling your side of the story, people already look at you through a distorted lens. You're not expressing yourself, you're proving them right. Suddenly, people you trusted are giving you strange looks. Friends are neutral. Family members are offering quiet concern as if you are fragile, confused, or emotional. You feel your reputation slipping, and worse, your reality being rewritten in front of you. And every time someone says, "Well, maybe they didn't mean it that way," or "They seemed really upset about how you treated them," a piece of your confidence dies. That's what gaslight by proxy does. It isolates you inside your own mind. You begin to doubt your memory, your emotions, your instincts. You stop speaking up because it seems no one will believe you anyway. And the manipulator? They sit at the center of it all, untouchable, admired even, because they've built a network that reflects their truth, not yours. What makes this tactic so devastating is the betrayal it brings. It's not just the manipulator causing harm, it's the people you thought were safe, the people who should defend you, believe you, see you, but instead they echo the gaslighting, sometimes without knowing, sometimes with full awareness. Gaslight by proxy isn't about convincing you, it's about convincing everyone else so thoroughly that you start to feel like the crazy one in your own story. And when that happens, the silence isn't just forced, it becomes total. False flattery. False flattery is a manipulation tactic that uses insincere praise not to uplift you, but to control you. It's not about making you feel good, it's about making you vulnerable. At its core, false flattery is emotional bait. It's designed to feed your ego just enough to lower your defenses, to hook your need for validation, and to keep you seeking approval from someone who never meant a word of it. The manipulator doesn't flatter you because they admire you. They flatter you because they've studied you. They know what you want to hear. They've watched how you light up when praised, how your posture changes when someone acknowledges you. So they say exactly what you crave. You're the smartest one here. No one does it like you. I wish everyone was as loyal as you. It sounds generous, thoughtful, kind, but it's a performance carefully crafted to make you pliable. What makes false flattery so dangerous is how quickly it creates emotional dependency. The praise triggers dopamine. It feels good. It affirms your worth, and you begin associating them with that feeling. So the next time they need something, a favor, silence, compliance, they don't have to argue or threaten. They just remind you how amazing you are, and you, eager to keep that praise flowing, start giving them what they want. It's especially effective on people who don't fully believe in their own value. If you're insecure, if you're exhausted, if you're healing from rejection, False flattery doesn't just sound nice, it feels necessary. You cling to it like proof that you're enough, and that's when it controls you. But the flattery is never consistent. That's part of the manipulation. One day you're brilliant, the next you're questioned. One moment you're the star, the next you're ignored. The emotional whiplash keeps you off balance and chasing their approval again. It's not about building your confidence, it's about owning it so they can take it away. You weren't being seen, you were being sized up. The compliments weren't gifts, they were tools, and once you're emotionally hooked, the very praise that made you feel powerful becomes the leash they use to keep you tame. Mimicry for rapport building. Mimicry for rapport building is a psychological technique that uses subtle imitation to create a false sense of connection, trust, and emotional safety. It's the calculated act of mirroring someone's voice, gestures, energy, interests, and even beliefs, not because you truly share them, but because you want them to believe you do. It's influence through reflection, where the manipulator becomes a human echo, syncing with you so perfectly that your brain begins to register them as familiar, likable, and safe. This tactic is incredibly effective because it exploits something deeply wired into our biology. We trust what feels like us. When someone matches our rhythm, when they speak at our pace, adopt our posture, or reflect our values, it lights up a primal signal in the brain that says, belonging. You don't even realize it's happening. You just feel understood, seen, comfortable, and that's when your guard drops. The manipulator knows this, so they study you. If you're introverted, they soften their tone. If you use sarcasm, they start doing it too. If you like certain music, hobbies, or ideas, they suddenly share those interests. You start hearing things like, I've never told anyone this before either, or it's crazy how alike we are. You feel like you found a soulmate, a best friend, a missing piece, but it's not a bond, it's a performance. Mimicry for rapport building isn't about genuine connection, it's about trust acquisition. The goal is to create alignment so that you'll open up, attach faster, and become easier to manipulate later. It's common in sales, seduction, cult recruitment, and toxic relationships. The mirroring is so well executed that by the time the mask slips, you're already emotionally invested. And when they inevitably change, when they stop reflecting you and reveal a colder, more controlling version of themselves, you feel confused, even betrayed. But part of you still holds on because you remember that early connection, that sense of being so understood. What you don't realize is that version of them never existed. It was you, reflected back at you to gain access to your trust. That's the danger of mimicry. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like home until it turns into a trap. Jealousy, induction. Jealousy, induction is a psychological manipulation tactic where someone deliberately provokes feelings of jealousy in you to gain power, provoke insecurity, or manipulate your behavior. It's not accidental, it's engineered, and it hits right where it hurts. Your self-worth, your trust, your sense of safety in a relationship. The manipulator doesn't create connection through honesty or affection. They create obsession through emotional destabilization. At first, it may seem subtle. They talk about someone else a little too often. They mention an ex, compliment a stranger, or flirt in front of you, and then deny it with a smirk. You're overreacting. I was just being friendly. But deep down, you feel it. The tightening in your chest, the drop in your stomach, the quiet war between your pride and your panic. That's not an accident. That's the point. Jealousy induction is about shifting the power dynamic. When the manipulator sees you growing comfortable, secure, or emotionally grounded, they destabilize you with doubt. Suddenly, you're not sure where you stand. You question your attractiveness, your importance, your place in their life. And while you're spiraling, they sit back and watch, calm, in control, feeding off your reaction. Because your jealousy isn't a problem for them, it's a signal that you care, that they've got you wrapped around them. This tactic is especially cruel because it makes you feel like the problem. When you confront them, they accuse you of being jealous, needy, or insecure. You feel ashamed for having emotions they deliberately triggered. You start competing with ghosts, exes, coworkers, random names they casually drop just to get a reaction. And every time you try to set a boundary, they twist it into a weakness. I can't even talk to other people now. Over time, jealousy induction doesn't just make you paranoid, it makes you dependent. You start working harder to impress them. You lose sleep wondering if you're enough. You overgive, overplease, overthink, hoping that if you just do more, they'll stop making you feel so replaceable. But that's the darkest truth. They don't want the jealousy to stop. They want to control you through it. They don't need to leave you for someone else. They just need you to believe they might. And in that fear, you give them everything, while slowly losing yourself. Mimicry for rapport building. Mimicry for rapport building is a psychological technique that uses subtle imitation to create a false sense of connection, trust, and emotional safety. It's the calculated act of mirroring someone's voice, gestures, energy, interests, and even beliefs, not because you truly share them, but because you want them to believe you do. It's influence through reflection, where the manipulator becomes a human echo, syncing with you so perfectly that your brain begins to register them as familiar, likable, and safe. This tactic is incredibly effective because it exploits something deeply wired into our biology. We trust what feels like us. When someone matches our rhythm, when they speak at our pace, adopt our posture, or reflect our values, it lights up a primal signal in the brain that says, belonging. You don't even realize it's happening. You just feel understood, seen, comfortable, and that's when your guard drops. The manipulator knows this, so they study you. If you're introverted, they soften their tone. If you use sarcasm, they start doing it too. If you like certain music, hobbies, or ideas, they suddenly share those interests. You start hearing things like, I've never told anyone this before either, or it's crazy how alike we are. You feel like you found a soulmate, a best friend, a missing piece, but it's not a bond, it's a performance. Mimicry for rapport building isn't about genuine connection. It's about trust acquisition. The goal is to create alignment so that you'll open up, attach faster, and become easier to manipulate later. It's common in sales, seduction, cult recruitment, and toxic relationships. The mirroring is so well executed that by the time the mask slips, you're already emotionally invested. And when they inevitably change, when they stop reflecting you and reveal a colder, more controlling version of themselves, you feel confused, even betrayed, but part of you still holds on because you remember that early connection, that sense of being so understood. What you don't realize is that version of them never existed. It was you, reflected back at you to gain access to your trust. That's the danger of mimicry. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like home until it turns into a trap. 4.0. You said, weaponized incompetence. ChatGPT said, weaponized incompetence. Weaponized incompetence is a manipulation tactic where someone deliberately pretends to be bad at something or exaggerates their inability to do it so that you'll take over the task, relieve them of responsibility, and lower your expectations permanently. It's not a lack of skill, it's a lack of effort, disguised as helplessness, and it's used to shift emotional and physical labor onto you without ever having to ask. It begins innocently enough. They can't load the dishwasher the right way. They don't know how to pay a bill online. They forget how to schedule a doctor's appointment or say they're just not good at talking about emotions. And when you try to guide them, they fumble, sigh, act confused, or make such a mess of it that it's easier and less frustrating for you to just do it yourself. That's the trap. You become the fixer, the emotional manager, the default adult in the relationship, and they get to sit back and play dumb. But here's the truth. No one is that bad at everything by accident. Weaponized incompetence is a strategy. It's learned helplessness turned into power, because the moment you lower the bar for them, they've won. They never have to meet it again. You stop asking, you stop expecting, and slowly the burden becomes yours to carry alone. What makes this tactic so insidious is how unthreatening it appears. They don't argue, they don't yell, they just can't. So if you get frustrated, you look unreasonable. If you demand more, you seem like a nag. They maintain control of the dynamic by making you feel like you have all the control. But it's not control, it's weight, unshared, unreciprocated, and silently resented. This behavior thrives in relationships, romantic, familial, professional, where one person is already more emotionally responsible. And over time, it doesn't just create imbalance, it creates burnout. You feel unappreciated, invisible, and exhausted. Meanwhile, they continue to fail upwards, smiling, shrugging, and saying, "You're just better at it than me." But that's not praise, that's the plan. Because if they're bad at it long enough, you'll stop expecting them to try at all. Framing with false urgency. Framing with false urgency is a high-pressure psychological manipulation tactic that forces you into rushed decisions by creating an artificial sense of time-sensitive consequence. It doesn't rely on facts, it relies on fear. The manipulator distorts the moment to feel like now is your only chance, knowing that when panic takes over, reason disappears. You're not being asked to decide, you're being pushed to react. It often comes cloaked in concern or opportunity. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. If you don't act now, it'll be too late. We don't have time to talk it through, you just have to trust me. These phrases aren't information, they're psychological throttles. They accelerate your decision-making process past the speed of logic and straight into emotional chaos. This tactic is used in abusive relationships to push boundaries, sexually, financially, emotionally. It's used in sales to manipulate buyers into saying yes before reading the fine print. It's used by cult leaders, shady employers, and manipulative partners who want control without giving you time to think. The clock is always ticking, and that ticking is the trap. What makes this technique so dangerous is that it doesn't feel like coercion. It feels like urgency. Your brain interprets it as a moment of importance. It goes into fight or flight mode, looking for the fastest exit from discomfort. So, you agree. You comply. You say yes just to escape the pressure. But what you're really escaping is clarity, because the manipulator knows that if you had even a few minutes to think, you might choose differently. Once you comply, they often back off. The urgency fades like it never existed, and that's when the shame sets in. You realize you were rushed, manipulated, cornered, but by then, you've already signed the paper, crossed the line, or made the promise, and they're counting on you to stay quiet, too embarrassed or confused to push back. Framing with false urgency works because it hijacks your ability to pause. It punishes hesitation. It disguises pressure as importance and stress as necessity. And the more overwhelmed you feel, the more likely you are to hand over your power, just to stop the noise, just to feel safe again, even if it means sacrificing what truly matters. Deceptive framing. Deceptive framing is a manipulation tactic that controls perception by carefully twisting how information is presented rather than what is actually said. It doesn't rely on lies. It relies on selective truths, loaded language, and psychological spin to make something harmful seem harmless or even virtuous. It's not about what you see. It's about making sure you see it through their lens. This tactic is subtle, powerful, and disturbingly common. A manipulator doesn't say, "I ignored your needs." They say, "I gave you space because I didn't want to smother you." They don't say, "I broke your trust." They say, "I made a mistake because I care so much. I got scared." They take an action that should provoke anger or doubt and dress it in words that provoke sympathy or guilt instead. The brilliance and danger of deceptive framing is that it gives the manipulator moral high ground. They become the victim, the martyr, the rational one. You feel foolish for being upset, selfish for demanding more, confused about what really happened. Your gut knows something's wrong, but their version sounds so reasonable, so logical, so wrapped in noble intent that you start to question your own instincts. They twist context to serve their agenda. They emphasize what benefits them and conveniently leave out what doesn't. They don't deny facts. They reshape the narrative so the facts feel different. And once they've controlled the narrative, they control your response. You may even end up defending them because you've been fed a version of reality where your hurt doesn't make sense. In toxic relationships, deceptive framing is used to justify emotional neglect, cheating, control, even abuse. I only check your messages because I care about our trust. I raise my voice because you don't listen unless I do. I'm not controlling, you just make reckless choices. Every word is designed to redirect the spotlight away from them and onto you. Deceptive framing doesn't force you to accept the lie. It makes you rethink the truth until you surrender it willingly. And that surrender feels like your choice, when in reality, it was orchestrated from the start. Entrapment, reciprocal obligation. Entrapment through reciprocal obligation is a psychological manipulation technique that weaponizes generosity to create invisible chains of guilt, pressure, and control. It preys on a deep human instinct. When someone gives us something, kindness, help, a gift, we feel compelled to give something back. But manipulators twist this instinct into a trap. Their generosity isn't a gift, it's bait. It starts with an unsolicited favor. They go out of their way to help you. They buy you something expensive. They defend you in front of others. They show up at just the right moment and say the words you desperately needed to hear. And you feel grateful, seen, protected. You tell yourself, this is someone I can trust. But then, slowly, the true cost of that kindness begins to surface. They ask for something in return, your time, your silence, your loyalty, your body. And if you hesitate, the guilt hits like a freight train. After everything I've done for you? Wow, I guess I shouldn't have bothered. You're just like everyone else, ungrateful. Suddenly, you're not dealing with a request. You're facing a debt you never agreed to, but now feel obligated to repay. This tactic works because it makes you feel morally trapped. Saying no doesn't feel like a boundary. It feels like a betrayal. So you compromise, you give in, you justify things you wouldn't normally accept just to stay even. But the scales never balance, because that was never the point. Every favor they give is calculated. Every kindness is a currency designed to put you in their emotional pocket. In relationships, this becomes a form of emotional blackmail. You stay longer than you should, tolerate more than you can bear, because you feel like you owe them your loyalty, your forgiveness, your silence. But you don't, because real giving doesn't demand repayment. Real kindness doesn't come with a hook. Manipulators count on you being too kind to walk away. They build the illusion of connection by giving you something valuable, only to use it as a leash. And the more generous they appear, the harder it is to admit you've been caught. But make no mistake, you weren't loved. You were bought. And every time you try to take your freedom back, they'll remind you just how much they gave, so you remember how much you're supposed to owe. Triadic closure manipulation. Triadic closure manipulation is a psychological technique where the manipulator strategically creates or leverages connections between people, usually you and a third party, to control narratives, build alliances, and quietly isolate or influence you. It's based on a powerful principle in social psychology. If person A is close to person B and person B is close to person C, then A and C are more likely to develop trust between them. The manipulator weaponizes that trust triangle to gain emotional leverage over everyone inside it. At first, it seems harmless, even positive. The manipulator encourages closeness. You two would get along great. Let me introduce you to someone who really understands me. You'll love them. They position themselves at the center of the triangle, the connector, the bridge, but what you don't realize is that they are carefully controlling what each person knows about the other. They plant seeds. Just a heads up, she can be emotional sometimes. Don't take what he says too seriously. He has a weird sense of humor. You enter the new connection already biased, already softened to manipulation without knowing it. Then the real manipulation begins. They use the triangle to distort perception, influence opinions, and triangulate blame. If you confront them on a lie, they'll say, "Well, even person C agrees with me." If you question their loyalty, they'll reply, "I told them everything. We're all on the same page." Now you're not just dealing with the manipulator, you're defending yourself against a dynamic that's been engineered to box you in. It's especially devastating when used in romantic or friend groups. You feel like you're being ganged up on, even if no one is directly attacking you. You second-guess your instincts because someone else always seems to be siding with them. You feel crazy, paranoid, alone, but what you're feeling is not paranoia. It's social manipulation done by someone who understands that alliances aren't built with honesty, but with carefully placed distortions. Triadic closure manipulation turns trust into a trap. It turns connection into control. And by the time you realize that the triangle wasn't built to include you, but to contain you, you've already stopped speaking freely, stopped trusting yourself, and started questioning who's really on your side. Halo effect exploitation. Halo effect exploitation is a psychological manipulation tactic that uses your positive perception of one trait, like beauty, charisma, intelligence, or success, to blind you to red flags in every other area. The manipulator doesn't change who they are. They just shine one part of themselves so brightly that you never think to question the shadows hiding behind it. It's not seduction, it's misdirection, and it works because your brain wants to believe in consistency. The halo effect is a cognitive bias where one positive trait creates an unconscious assumption that everything else about a person must also be good. If someone is attractive, we assume they're kind. If they're charming, we assume they're honest. If they're successful, we assume they're emotionally stable. But manipulators know how to weaponize that bias. They polish the part of themselves that dazzles, then hide their darker traits behind it. They might dress impeccably, speak with confidence, and make others laugh effortlessly. They may appear generous in public, loving in early stages, or deeply intelligent in conversation. These traits make you feel safe, special, lucky. And because your mind fills in the blanks, you stop looking closely. You make excuses for their coldness, their cruelty, their control. You explain it away. They're just stressed. They didn't mean it. That's not who they really are. But it is. You just can't see it clearly because the halo is in your eyes now. This form of manipulation is especially dangerous because it's not overt. It doesn't scream abuse. It whispers charm. It's the CEO who leads with vision but abuses power behind closed doors. The romantic partner who makes you feel adored in public but emotionally withholds in private. The perfect friend who quietly competes with or undermines you. You trust them because they shine, but that shine isn't truth, it's armor. And the moment you begin to question it, when you finally start pointing out inconsistencies or setting boundaries, you're met with disbelief, not just from them, but from others, because they've exploited the halo effect so well that people see their brilliance, not their damage. You're not just fighting their manipulation, you're fighting the illusion they built, and the world is already on their side. Desensitization by gradual exposure. Desensitization by gradual exposure is a psychological manipulation tactic that conditions you to accept unacceptable behavior, not all at once, but in tiny, almost imperceptible steps. It's the slow erosion of your boundaries through repeated, low-level violations that escalate over time until the things that once shocked you now feel normal. It doesn't start with abuse. It starts with discomfort, and it's so gradual, you don't even realize how far you've been pulled under. At first, it might be a slightly mean joke, a dismissive comment, a broken promise. You feel uneasy, but they apologize, or pretend it's not a big deal. So you let it slide. Then it happens again, maybe a little worse, and again and again. The behavior escalates in small doses, never so extreme that it demands immediate confrontation, but just enough to leave a mark. That's how desensitization works. Your nervous system, which once sounded alarm bells, starts going quiet. You get used to the tension, the discomfort, the emotional shifts. You start telling yourself, it's not that bad. You adjust. You lower your expectations. You convince yourself you're being mature, understanding, patient, when in reality, you're being conditioned. The manipulator knows exactly what they're doing. If they came at you with full force cruelty from day one, you'd run. But by introducing harm slowly, they train you to tolerate it. They reset your baseline for what feels normal in a relationship, and by the time things become outright toxic, you've already been emotionally numbed. Your instincts are dulled, your tolerance is high, your fight response has been replaced with silence. This tactic is used in abusive relationships, cults, authoritarian systems, even in toxic workplaces. It works because it doesn't feel like brainwashing. It feels like adaptation. You believe you're handling things well, that you're strong enough to stay calm, that your empathy is making a difference, but really you're being rewired to accept the unacceptable 1 inch at a time. And the scariest part? You often don't realize how far you've gone until someone on the outside says, "Wait, how are you okay with this?" That moment doesn't feel like truth. It feels like waking up in a house that's already on fire. Mirroring vulnerabilities. Mirroring vulnerabilities is a highly manipulative psychological tactic where someone pretends to share your deepest fears, wounds, or emotional scars, not to connect, but to control. It's not real intimacy. It's an emotional illusion crafted to build trust quickly, lower your defenses, and make you feel seen in a way that feels profound, but is entirely fabricated. It's not shared pain. It's stolen pain. It begins with you opening up. You tell them something raw, maybe about a childhood trauma, a betrayal, a personal insecurity. Most people would listen with empathy, but a manipulator sees opportunity. Moments later, or even instantly, they mirror it back. That's crazy. I went through the exact same thing. They match your tone. They echo your language. They mimic your emotional energy like a reflection. And in that moment, you feel connected, like you found someone who gets you. But they don't. They're not revealing themselves. They're studying you. Every vulnerability you expose becomes a script for them to perform. And every time they mirror one of your wounds, you bond deeper, because it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like fate, like you're not alone, like this person was meant to find you. What makes this tactic so dangerous is how quickly it builds false intimacy. You find yourself trusting them more than you've trusted people you've known for years. You fast-track emotional investment, and you start to overlook red flags because someone finally understands you. That sameness becomes a form of emotional glue. You attach to the reflection, never realizing it's not real. Then the power shift begins. The very things you thought you shared become weapons. They know your fears, your triggers, your weak spots. They use them to manipulate you, to guilt you, to silence you. You feel exposed, confused. How could someone who understood you so deeply suddenly turn cold, cruel, or indifferent? Because they never truly understood you. They replicated you. They built a false self out of your story so they could burrow into your trust. And once they were inside, they didn't offer healing. They exploited the open wound they helped you expose. This isn't emotional bonding, it's emotional burglary. And by the time you realize they've been wearing a mask made from your pain, you're already unguarded, already attached, already owned. Shame anchoring is a deeply manipulative, psychological tactic where a person intentionally attaches feelings of shame to specific behaviors, desires, or expressions of self, so that every time you try to act freely, you're pulled back by the invisible weight of humiliation. It's not just about making you feel bad in the moment, it's about planting shame like a hook inside your psyche, so that it drags you down again and again, long after the words were said. The manipulator uses your vulnerabilities against you, things you care about, things you're proud of, or even things you've never dared to share. Maybe you opened up about a passion, a struggle, a part of yourself that felt fragile, and instead of meeting it with support, they smirked, rolled their eyes, or delivered a cutting remark. That's so childish. No one wants to hear about your problems all the time. Why would you even think that's impressive? They anchor shame to the moment, to you, and you feel it, the sinking hot flush of embarrassment. You may laugh it off, change the subject, tell yourself they didn't mean it, but the damage is already done, because the next time you try to express that part of yourself, a voice inside whispers, "Don't. Remember how stupid you looked?" And you freeze. That's the power of shame anchoring. It doesn't require repetition. It requires precision. One well-timed jab, delivered in a moment of vulnerability, and the emotional reflex is installed. And once it's there, the manipulator doesn't have to shame you anymore. You'll do it yourself. You'll silence your own voice, hide your own joy, choke down your own opinions. This tactic is especially cruel because it often comes cloaked in humor or honesty. They'll say, "I'm just being real," or "Can't you take a joke?" So if you confront them, you seem oversensitive, and the shame doubles. Eventually, you stop sharing, you stop shining, you shrink, not because someone broke you loudly, but because they anchored shame to the parts of you that once felt alive. And now, even freedom feels dangerous, not because it is, but because someone taught you it should. Selective memory manipulation. Selective memory manipulation is a deeply deceptive psychological tactic where the manipulator intentionally remembers only certain parts of events, specifically the ones that serve their narrative, while conveniently forgetting everything else. It's not about memory lapses. It's about rewriting reality to control perception, avoid accountability, and make you question your own recollection. And over time, it doesn't just distort what happened, it distorts who you think you are. The manipulator cherry picks moments that benefit them. They remember every favor they did for you, but none of the ones you did for them. They recall your outbursts, but never the weeks of provocation that led to them. They hold on to one mistake you made, but forget the countless times they hurt you. They treat partial truths like the whole story, and every time you try to fill in the blanks, you're met with denial, deflection, or a smug, "That's not how I remember it." This tactic is gaslighting in disguise. It doesn't flat out deny your reality. It edits it, just enough to plant doubt. You start replaying moments in your head, wondering if you're overreacting, misremembering, being unfair. But you're not. You're being rewritten by someone who wants to control the narrative more than they want to be honest. In arguments, selective memory manipulation becomes a weapon of silence and omission. They recall things that make them look like the victim and leave out everything that makes them look accountable. They'll say, "I never raised my voice," even though they did, but just not when anyone else was around. They'll insist you always twist things, as they twist the timeline, the tone, the truth. Over time, this manipulation causes internal erosion. You begin to doubt your emotional instincts. You hesitate before bringing up valid concerns because you're not sure if you even remember things correctly. And that hesitation is the manipulator's victory, because if you can't trust your own memory, you start relying on theirs. You hand over your reality like a weapon, and they use it to control the story of you. What you're left with isn't just confusion, it's an identity crisis, because if they get to decide what happened, they get to decide who you were in that moment, and little by little, your truth gets replaced by their fiction, until even you aren't sure which version is real anymore. Unpredictable reward system. The unpredictable reward system is a manipulation technique that operates like emotional gambling. It keeps you trapped in a cycle of confusion, craving, and desperation by offering praise, affection, or approval inconsistently and unpredictably. One moment, you're adored. The next, you're ignored. Then suddenly, they're warm again, just long enough to make you stay, to make you hope, to make you chase. This tactic isn't about love, it's about control, and it works by turning your nervous system into a slot machine. In the early stages, the manipulator showers you with attention, texting constantly, complimenting you, showing affection so intensely that it feels euphoric. It hooks you, but then, without warning, they pull away. They stop responding. They act distant, cold, distracted. You panic. What did I do? Did I upset them? Did I change? The silence hurts, but just as you start pulling back or questioning the relationship, they return. Affectionate, reassuring, maybe even apologetic. And in that moment, the relief you feel floods your system with dopamine, not just joy, relief. That hit is more powerful than steady love because it comes after pain, and now you're addicted, not to them, but to the chase, the uncertainty, the pattern you're desperate to crack. You begin to work harder to please them. You silence your needs to avoid pushing them away. You analyze every word, every look, every moment, searching for clues on how to earn the reward again, and they give it, just enough to keep the hope alive, but never enough to feel secure. This is how the unpredictable reward system creates emotional dependence. The inconsistency is the trap. If they treated you badly all the time, you'd leave. If they treated you well all the time, you'd relax. But by mixing cruelty with kindness, they keep your emotions unstable and your focus entirely on them. You start blaming yourself for their distance. You start rewarding them for hurting you just because they stopped. And over time, you forget what real love feels like. You forget that peace shouldn't feel like winning a game you were never meant to play. Phantom norms. Phantom norms are unspoken, invisible rules that a manipulator invents and enforces as if they were universally understood and morally unquestionable. But they're not. They are artificial expectations disguised as common sense. You never agreed to them. You were never told them outright. But when you break one, you're punished as if you've committed a serious betrayal. This tactic doesn't just control your actions, it reprograms your reality. The manipulator uses phantom norms to shape your behavior without your consent. They imply standards you should already know. Everyone knows you don't do that. I shouldn't have to explain this to you. That's just basic respect. But when you stop and think about it, nothing about these rules was ever mutual, explicit, or fair. They're vague, shifting, and entirely in the manipulator's favor. Maybe you didn't respond to a text fast enough. Maybe you didn't invite them to something you didn't even think they'd care about. Suddenly, you're being cold-shouldered, guilt-tripped, or accused of being selfish. You try to defend yourself, but the more you explain, the worse it gets. Because this isn't about what's right or wrong. It's about enforcing a rule you didn't know existed until you broke it. This tactic creates a constant sense of walking on eggshells. You start overthinking every move, not because you've done something wrong, but because you're terrified of breaking another invisible rule. You lose spontaneity, authenticity, and confidence. You become hypervigilant, scanning for clues about what's acceptable, trying to stay on the manipulator's good side without ever knowing the criteria. Phantom norms also breed guilt and shame. You internalize the idea that you're somehow failing, socially, emotionally, or morally, because someone keeps reacting to you like you should have known better. But the truth is, you're not failing. You're being played. These rules aren't universal. They're custom designed to control you, to keep you off balance, obedient, and apologizing for things you never agreed were wrong in the first place. What makes phantom norms so devastating is their invisibility. There's no clear boundary to push back against, just the constant, unspoken threat that you'll be judged, shamed, or discarded if you don't keep playing by rules that only one person knows, and that person changes them whenever it suits their agenda. Echoic agreement trap. The echoic agreement trap is a manipulative tactic that disguises control as agreement. It works by mirroring your thoughts, values, dreams, or frustrations so convincingly that you believe you finally found someone who truly understands you. But what feels like deep emotional resonance is actually a performance designed to lower your defenses, earn your trust, and set the stage for later exploitation. At first, it's intoxicating. You express something vulnerable, your fears about love, your childhood wounds, your dreams of freedom, and they echo it back with uncanny precision. I've always felt that too. It's like you're saying everything I've been thinking. No one else has ever understood me the way you do. You feel seen, understood, safe. You drop your guard and open up more. And every time you do, they reflect your thoughts right back to you like a mirror, saying exactly what you need to hear. It's not a conversation. It's an emotional seduction. But here's the trap. The agreement isn't real. It's tactical. The manipulator isn't revealing their truth. They're collecting yours. They're memorizing your values, language, and emotional patterns to gain influence over you later. Because when someone mirrors your mind, your brain interprets that as trustworthiness, as truth. And when they've gained that trust, the shift begins. Suddenly, the agreement starts to waver, but gently. You're questioned, corrected, subtly redirected. You've already bonded with them so deeply, you assume you must be the one misunderstanding. And so, you start adjusting. You start conforming. You begin to follow their values, thinking they were yours all along. This tactic is common in toxic relationships, cults, manipulative friendships, and abusive dynamics. It doesn't begin with domination. It begins with echoes. And once you hear your own voice coming out of their mouth, you stop protecting it. You hand it over willingly. The echoic agreement trap doesn't steal your identity outright. It gets you to share it piece by piece until you look in the mirror one day and see someone else's reflection smiling back. False scarcity illusion. False scarcity. Illusion is a psychological manipulation tactic that creates the illusion that something, love, opportunity, attention, time, is extremely limited, even when it's not, in order to pressure you into action, compliance, or emotional dependence. It hijacks your survival instincts, triggering urgency, fear of loss, and a desperate need to secure your spot before it's too late. But the scarcity isn't real. It's manufactured to make you feel replaceable, rushed, and not good enough. The manipulator might hint that they're always in high demand. Other people would kill to be with me. You're lucky I chose you. This is a one-time chance. They subtly suggest you could lose them at any moment, or that others are lining up to take your place. Romantically, professionally, emotionally. You start believing you have to earn what they're offering. You become afraid to make mistakes. You start chasing validation, terrified that if you don't act fast or stay perfect, someone else will take what you thought was yours. This illusion works because it targets your deepest insecurities. It makes you feel like what you want is just out of reach and that you must compete to keep it. It reframes love, attention, and opportunity as something you're lucky to receive, not something you deserve. You forget your worth. You start hustling for affection, walking on eggshells, and accepting treatment that you would never tolerate if you weren't so afraid of losing what little you believe you're being offered. False scarcity is used in romantic manipulation, especially by narcissists, to keep partners compliant. It's used in toxic work cultures where employees are told jobs like this don't come around often. It's used in marketing, cult recruitment, and abusive friendships. It doesn't matter if what they're offering is actually valuable. What matters is that you believe it's rare. But here's the dark truth. The scarcity is a setup. The manipulator often dangles the same offer in front of others. The urgency is theater. They never intended to walk away. They just wanted to see how far you'd go to keep them. And by the time you realize there was never any shortage, you've already overinvested, emotionally, financially, physically, trying to hold on to something that was never going anywhere because it wasn't love or opportunity. It was leverage, wrapped in fear, powered by illusion. Tactical praise withdrawal. Tactical praise withdrawal is a psychological manipulation tactic where affection, approval, and validation are given early and generously, only to be suddenly and strategically taken away. It creates a silent emotional vacuum that leaves you scrambling to earn back what you once received freely. The praise becomes a drug, and its absence, withdrawal. At first, the praise is intoxicating. You're told how brilliant, beautiful, strong, or rare you are. Every gesture you make is met with admiration. You feel chosen, elevated, seen in a way that feels almost spiritual. This stage isn't accidental. It's the setup. The manipulator builds you up, not to celebrate you, but to create a high they can later control. Then, just as suddenly, the praise stops. Not in anger, but in silence. Things that once earned you affection now earn you nothing. No smile, no compliments, no affirmation. You feel a shift, and your nervous system panics. Did you do something wrong? Did you change? What do they see now that they didn't before? That's the trap. The withdrawal isn't an accident. It's deliberate. It's designed to create insecurity, make you question yourself, and trigger a desperate effort to regain the manipulator's approval. You try harder. You apologize for things you didn't do. You begin molding yourself into whatever version of you they seem to like before, not because you want to, but because you need to feel loved again. What makes this tactic so dangerous is that the praise will return, but only in small, unpredictable doses, just enough to hook you again, to reward your compliance. And then, once you're stable, it vanishes again. This cycle creates an emotional dependence that feels exactly like addiction. The longer the withdrawal lasts, the more euphoric the praise feels when it finally returns. You don't realize you're being trained, conditioned to associate their approval with your worth. And by the time you do, you've already given up parts of yourself to get it back. Tactical praise withdrawal isn't about love, it's about power. It's not just what they give, it's what they take away and how desperately they make you miss it. Distorted reciprocity. Distorted reciprocity is a psychological manipulation tactic that twists the natural give and take of human relationships into a weapon. It takes the beautiful human instinct to return kindness and warps it into a tool of control, guilt, and obligation. This isn't about mutual respect or balanced exchange. It's about keeping score in secret and then using that hidden scoreboard to make you feel like you owe more than you ever agreed to give. At first, the manipulator seems incredibly generous. They go out of their way to help you, give you things, support you emotionally, maybe even financially. You're caught off guard. It feels sincere. You start to trust. You might even feel lucky. But soon after, the tone shifts. They start reminding you, explicitly or subtly, of everything they've done. After all I've done for you, this is how you treat me? I guess I just care more than you do. What once felt like a gift now feels like a debt. The trap of distorted reciprocity lies in how unspoken it is at first. You were never told there were strings attached. You never asked for the help to be transactional. But once you accept it, the manipulator changes the rules. Suddenly, they expect unquestioning loyalty, endless emotional labor, Immediate favors, silence, submission, and if you resist, you're ungrateful, you're selfish, you're toxic. This tactic is especially damaging because it turns your kindness into a vulnerability. You feel guilty for having needs. You feel wrong for saying no. You begin overcompensating, doing more than you want, giving more than you can just to make things even. But the scales are rigged. No matter how much you give, it's never enough because the manipulator keeps inflating what they've done and minimizing what you do in return. Distorted reciprocity doesn't just control behavior, it corrodes self-worth. It makes you believe that the only way to keep love, safety, or peace is by constantly paying off an invisible emotional debt. You lose the ability to say no without guilt. You stop asking for what you need. You become a servant to a balance sheet that only exists in their mind. You were never in a relationship. You were in a transaction you didn't agree to. One where the price keeps rising and the receipt is always held over your head like a loaded gun. Neuro-linguistic pattern disruption. Neuro-linguistic pattern disruption is a psychological manipulation tactic that interrupts your natural thought and behavior patterns through confusion, contradiction, or emotional shock, causing a temporary mental vulnerability that the manipulator uses to implant suggestions, control decisions, or push boundaries you normally wouldn't cross. It doesn't overpower you through force. It hacks your mind by derailing it. Our brains love predictability. When conversations follow expected rhythms, our subconscious stays in control. But when something suddenly doesn't make sense, a strange question, a bizarre compliment, an emotional pivot that doesn't match the situation, your mental gears grind to a halt. Your conscious mind kicks in, trying to figure out what just happened. And in that brief moment of confusion, you're open. That's where the manipulator strikes. They might say something strange in a moment of tension, like interrupting an argument with a random joke, a deep philosophical question, or even an offbeat compliment. Why do you always look so calm when you're upset? It's kind of beautiful. Now your anger is interrupted. Your mental track derails. You pause. And in that pause, the emotional tone of the interaction shifts, controlled by them. In darker cases, they might use pattern disruption in high emotion settings, delivering a shocking confession, a sudden apology, or an unexpected emotional outburst in the middle of a calm conversation. The chaos shocks your nervous system into a hyper-alert, reactive state, one where you stop thinking logically and start feeling, and they guide you through that chaos with their words, nudging your thoughts exactly where they want them. This tactic is often used in cult recruitment, aggressive sales tactics, psychological abuse, and pickup artist strategies. It's not about making sense, it's about scrambling sense long enough to disarm you. What makes this so unsettling is how invisible it is. You walk away from the conversation feeling off-balanced, unsure why you gave in, why you changed your mind, or why you suddenly feel empathy for someone who just hurt you. But the truth is, you didn't decide. They disrupted, and while you were trying to find your footing, they planted the path for you. Strategic self-disclosure. Strategic self-disclosure is a manipulation tactic where someone shares personal information, not to build genuine connection, but to lower your defenses, create false intimacy, and extract trust, secrets, or loyalty from you. It feels like vulnerability, but it's a performance, a carefully timed revelation designed not to connect, but to disarm. At first, it's disarming. You're speaking with someone who suddenly opens up to you. They reveal a painful memory, a dark struggle, a private story. Maybe it's about a toxic ex, a broken family, a traumatic past. It catches you off guard. You feel honored, chosen. You think, they trust me. And so, without even realizing it, you start opening up too. That's the trap. Because the manipulator isn't being vulnerable. They're being strategic. They share just enough pain to appear human, just enough detail to seem real, but not enough to actually make themselves emotionally exposed. Their story has been rehearsed, selectively edited, designed to trigger your empathy and encourage emotional reciprocity. And the moment you start spilling your soul in return, they've won. This tactic is especially effective in early-stage relationships, job interviews, political persuasion, or cult recruitment. You bond with them fast. You skip the normal boundaries. You trust them more quickly than you should. And why wouldn't you? They went first. They bared their soul. But what you don't see is how often they use the same script with others. How many people have been pulled in by the same sob story? What makes strategic self-disclosure so dangerous is how much it feels like love, honesty, or deep connection. It tugs at your compassion and bypasses your logical guardrails. You start seeing this person as safe, as someone who gets you, but it's not you they're interested in. It's your openness, your secrets, your emotional availability, because the more you reveal, the easier you are to influence, manipulate, and control. Eventually, the cracks show. Their stories don't add up. The empathy fades, and the same person who once opened their heart to you uses what you told them against you, not out of passion, out of calculation, because their vulnerability was never about truth. It was a mask used to unlock yours. Ambiguity control. Ambiguity control is a psychological manipulation tactic that thrives on intentional vagueness. It's when someone withholds clarity, avoids commitment, or delivers mixed signals, not because they're confused, but because they want you to be. It's a strategy designed to keep you guessing, overthinking, and emotionally chasing answers that never come. By controlling the level of uncertainty in a relationship or conversation, the manipulator controls you. At first, it may seem like subtle miscommunication. You ask where you stand with them, and they say things like, "Let's just see where it goes," or "I don't like labels." You bring up how their actions hurt you, and they respond, "You're reading too much into it." Their words don't contradict you outright. They just never anchor to anything solid. And that ambiguity, it becomes the leash. Because when someone refuses to define the dynamic, you're left doing all the emotional work. You try to read between the lines. You analyze texts, replay conversations, look for hidden meanings. You shapeshift, you adapt, all to earn the clarity they deliberately deny you. And that's the game. The more unclear they are, the more invested you become in trying to understand them. This tactic gives the manipulator enormous power without ever appearing cruel. They're not yelling, they're not accusing, they're just floating, always slightly out of reach. You can't hold them accountable because technically they never made a promise. They never said, "I love you." They never said, "We're exclusive." They never said, "I care." But they also never said they don't. And so you stay. You stay because of what might be, because of the potential, because of the moments where it almost feels real. And those moments, those fragments of warmth, attention, or affection are just enough to keep you hoping, trying, waiting. What makes ambiguity control so effective is that it feels like your own uncertainty. You think the problem is your anxiety, your impatience, your inability to just go with the flow. But the truth is, you're not lost. You're being kept lost, because as long as you're stuck in the fog, they never have to show you who they really are. Value extraction framing. Value extraction framing is a psychological manipulation tactic where the manipulator positions every interaction, relationship, or exchange in terms of what you can offer and what they can gain. It's not about mutual benefit. It's about quietly conditioning you to measure your worth by your utility. The unspoken message is clear. You are only as valuable as what you provide. It starts subtly. They praise you for being useful, selfless, or different from the rest. They say things like, "You always come through when I need you," or "I don't know what I'd do without you." It feels flattering at first. You feel chosen, needed. You begin taking pride in your ability to help, fix, or sacrifice. But underneath the surface, a quiet truth takes hold. If I stop being useful, I stop being loved. This framing shifts the relationship dynamic completely. You start anticipating their needs before your own. You overextend, overgive, and overfunction just to maintain your place in their life. You stop asking for things because you're afraid it will make you seem demanding or high maintenance. They don't have to say it outright. You've internalized the rule. Your value is conditional. The manipulator reinforces this by reacting negatively when you assert boundaries or say no. Suddenly, you're not the amazing friend, partner, or employee anymore. You're difficult. You're cold. You're replaceable. They make you feel like a burden for needing rest, space, or recognition. And just like that, you scramble to prove your worth again, not through love, but through service. Value extraction. Framing is especially destructive because it doesn't scream abuse. It whispers unworthiness. You're never directly told you don't matter. You're just slowly trained to believe that your needs matter less than your function, that love must be earned through sacrifice, that peace is kept by producing, fixing, pleasing, performing. Over time, you begin to disappear, not all at once, but in small, quiet ways. You stop expressing yourself. You stop being messy, real, human. You become efficient, predictable, emotionally available only when it's convenient for them, and they thrive, feeding off your effort, your energy, your silence, while you slowly forget that your value was never meant to be a transaction. Fear then relief technique. The fear then relief technique is a psychological manipulation tactic that jolts you with anxiety, panic, or dread, and then suddenly removes the threat to trigger emotional vulnerability, compliance, and gratitude. It doesn't just influence your behavior, it hijacks your nervous system. And it works because the moment fear is relieved, your brain releases a chemical flood of relief so powerful it makes you more likely to trust, agree, or obey the very person who scared you in the first place. This tactic begins with fear. It could be a threat, a lie, a misunderstanding, or a moment of high tension. A boss says, "We need to talk about your job status right now." A partner says, "I can't do this anymore." A parent goes silent after you confess something vulnerable. The fear sets in fast. You feel your stomach drop, your breath quicken, your thoughts spiral. You brace for impact. And then, just as the fear peaks, it vanishes. "I was just kidding. It's not that serious. Don't worry. I was just testing you." That's the relief. And it's designed to make you emotionally collapse into the arms of the person who just made your heart race. In that moment, you're flooded with gratitude, not clarity. You don't question why they scared you. You don't examine the manipulation. You just feel grateful that things aren't as bad as they almost were. And that gratitude creates a twisted sense of loyalty. They feel like a savior, even if they were the source of the threat. This tactic is widely used in interrogation rooms, sales pitches, toxic relationships, and emotional abuse. The emotional roller coaster leaves you too disoriented to resist, too drained to argue. You comply, not because it makes sense, but because you're desperate for the feeling of safety they've made you associate with them. The danger of the fear then relief technique is that it builds dependence. You begin associating your peace with the person who took it away in the first place, and before long, you're not avoiding danger. You're clinging to the illusion of safety, even when you should be running from the one who created the fear to begin with. Reverse mirroring. Reverse mirroring is a subtle but potent psychological manipulation tactic where the manipulator reflects you back to yourself, not to build rapport, but to blend in, disarm you, and gain your trust. Unlike traditional mirroring, where someone imitates your gestures, tone, or energy to create connection, reverse mirroring flips the script. The manipulator adopts your identity to become exactly who you want them to be, not because it's who they are, but because it's how they get inside your mind. It starts with uncanny synchronicity. You talk about a passion, and they love it too. You share a belief, and they already feel the same way. Your humor, your wounds, your worldview, they mirror all of it. You're not just heard, you're seen. You begin to think, no one has ever understood me like this, and that's exactly what they want you to believe. But what's really happening is psychological camouflage. The manipulator isn't bonding with you. They're building a persona out of your own reflections. The more you open up, the more material they gather. Your language becomes their language. Your emotional rhythms become their mask. It feels like destiny. In reality, it's design. This tactic is devastatingly effective in romantic relationships, sales, cult grooming, and even fake friendships. You bond quickly. You trust faster than usual. You bypass red flags because this person feels familiar. But that familiarity isn't real. It's constructed from everything you've revealed. They haven't shown you who they are. They've shown you who you are, fed back through a polished, seductive mirror. The danger of reverse mirroring is that it builds false intimacy while keeping their true self completely hidden. You fall in love with a reflection. You commit to someone who doesn't actually exist. And when their mask eventually slips, when their real behaviors contradict the identity they mirrored, you feel betrayed, confused, even ashamed. You wonder, how could I have been so wrong? But you weren't wrong. You were targeted. The manipulator never showed up to be known. They showed up to be accepted, and the quickest way to earn your acceptance was to become a version of you, not for love, not for connection, but for access, influence, and control. They didn't mirror you to get closer. They mirrored you so you'd never see who they really were. Social proof, hoaxing. Social proof hoaxing is a psychological manipulation tactic that fabricates or exaggerates popularity, approval, or consensus to influence your beliefs, choices, and trust. It exploits one of the most powerful principles of human behavior. If others believe it, it must be true. But in this case, the others are illusions, carefully curated, selectively presented, or outright invented to make you question your instincts and follow the crowd that doesn't actually exist. It starts subtly. The manipulator references vague people who agree with them. Everyone else thinks I'm right. My friends say you're overreacting. No one else has ever had a problem with me. They drop these statements not as facts but as anchors, and your brain, wired for social survival, starts second-guessing itself. If you're the only one who sees the issue, maybe you are the problem. Maybe your perception is off. Maybe you're being unreasonable. But here's the truth. There is often no everyone. There are no friends weighing in. There is no silent consensus. There's just you, doubting yourself because of a lie that was made to feel like evidence. Social proof hoaxing is especially effective in group settings or online environments. A manipulator might fake testimonials, reference anonymous support, or align themselves with authority figures who never endorse them. They may surround themselves with people who agree by default, or punish dissent so harshly that silence becomes complicity. They don't need actual credibility. They just need to appear backed by numbers. And once you believe they have the group behind them, it becomes harder to stand your ground. You stay quiet to avoid being the outlier. You conform to avoid isolation. And that's the goal, to make resistance feel socially dangerous. Over time, you may even begin parroting their narrative, just to feel safe, just to belong, just to survive in a world where your truth feels outnumbered, even when it's the only truth that's real. Social proof. Hoaxing doesn't use facts. It uses fear of exclusion, and it works not because you're weak, but because humans were built to follow the crowd, even when the crowd is a ghost. False equivalence. Framing False equivalence framing is a psychological manipulation tactic that distorts logic by comparing two unlike things as if they are equal in weight, blame, or impact. It's not an argument, it's a trick, a way to blur moral lines, shift accountability, and make you feel like you're just as guilty or just as flawed as the manipulator. It's the art of saying, well, you do it too, even when what they did cut deeper, hit harder, or cross boundaries you never touched. This tactic thrives in conflict. You confront someone for lying, and they respond, well, you kept secrets too. You call them out for manipulation, and they fire back, you're controlling sometimes, don't act like a saint. It sounds balanced, fair, reasonable, but it's not, because what they're doing isn't taking accountability, it's diluting it, twisting the situation until everything feels gray, until you can no longer tell the abuser from the victim. False equivalence is especially disorienting because it targets your empathy. You want to be fair. You are willing to own your flaws. So when someone flips the script, you pause, you look inward, and while you're busy questioning yourself, they're slipping away from the consequences of their actions. The more you bend to be equal, the more power they regain. This tactic also shows up in toxic relationships where one person crosses a clear line, cheating, gaslighting, or emotionally abusing, and then frames your reaction as equally harmful. You yelling at me is no better than me lying to you. Or, you left the house during the argument. That's abandonment too. The goal is not reconciliation. The goal is neutralization, to make sure no one's held truly accountable, especially not them. What makes false equivalence framing so dangerous is how quickly it erodes your moral compass. You start believing that fairness means shared blame, even when one person clearly crossed the line. You begin softening your voice, holding back your truth, minimizing your pain to be the bigger person, and in doing so, you let them off the hook. This isn't equality, it's emotional sabotage, wrapped in the language of balance. They don't want to meet you halfway. They want to drag you down into the mud so they don't have to climb out of it. And if you let them reframe your truth into something just as bad, they win, not because they're innocent, but because they convinced you that no one is. Artificial authority creation. Artificial authority creation is a psychological manipulation tactic where someone fabricates or exaggerates status, expertise, or credibility to gain control, obedience, and admiration without having to earn it. It's not about actually being qualified. It's about appearing powerful enough that others stop questioning, start obeying, and hand over trust they would never give so freely if they knew the truth. This tactic works because people are conditioned to respect authority. From childhood, we're taught to listen to teachers, bosses, doctors, and leaders. So when someone walks into your life with the right tone, the right title, the right image, your brain registers them as someone to defer to. And a manipulator knows exactly how to dress that illusion. They may flash credentials that can't be verified. They may reference vague experience, name drop influential people, or tell you how respected they are in their field. They may adopt the language of psychology, business, religion, or science to sound authoritative, even when what they're saying is shallow, misleading, or completely fabricated. Their confidence becomes your evidence. And once you buy into that authority, the power shifts. You stop challenging their opinions. You start accepting their criticisms. You second-guess your own knowledge, even when you're right. This tactic thrives in toxic relationships, workplace hierarchies, spiritual abuse, and predatory coaching or self-help environments. A manipulator using artificial authority might say things like, "Trust me, I know people like you. You wouldn't understand. I've studied this for years. I'm only telling you this because no one else will be honest with you." They don't give you facts. They give you a throne and sit on it before you realize it's made of air. What makes this tactic dangerous is how quickly it dissolves your confidence. You stop trusting yourself. You defer, comply, obey, And even when your instincts scream that something feels wrong, you override them, because surely someone with this much authority can't be manipulative, right? But real authority doesn't need to convince you. It doesn't need costume or performance. Only artificial authority does, because its power doesn't come from truth. It comes from the illusion of it, and it only works if you believe the crown is real. Empathy, weaponization. Empathy, weaponization is one of the most insidious psychological manipulation tactics because it uses your greatest strength, your ability to care, to feel, to understand, against you. It's the calculated exploitation of your compassion to excuse harmful behavior, avoid consequences, or keep you emotionally trapped. It doesn't break your heart all at once. It uses your heart to break your boundaries piece by piece. The manipulator doesn't scream or demand. They suffer, they cry, they shut down. They tell you about their trauma, their pain, their tragic past in moments when they should be apologizing. When you confront them about the ways they've hurt you, they pivot. You have no idea what I've been through. I'm trying the best I can. I wish you could understand how hard it is for me. And suddenly, you're the one comforting them. The pain they caused you is pushed aside because now you feel bad for making them feel bad. This tactic is especially effective because it taps into your humanity. You don't want to be cruel. You do want to understand. So you give them the benefit of the doubt. You excuse their aggression, their neglect, their betrayal, telling yourself they didn't mean it. They're hurting. They're trying. And little by little, you stop expecting accountability. You start making sacrifices for someone who never truly intends to change. Empathy, weaponization is not just emotional manipulation, it's emotional inversion. You, the one being harmed, become the caretaker, the fixer, the protector of someone who keeps dropping emotional bombs and handing you the guilt for the explosion. It makes you feel that walking away isn't just painful, it's heartless. That setting a boundary is being cold, that asking for respect is being selfish, and the more you give, the more they take, because they know that you can't stand the idea of being unkind. They don't need to overpower you, they just need to trigger your compassion, and you'll do the silencing, the justifying, the forgiving for them. This tactic doesn't just trap you in a toxic relationship, it traps you in a war with your own empathy. You begin to wonder if being good means always being forgiving, even when it's destroying you. And that's exactly how they keep control, not with violence, but with your own goodness turned against you.